The Huayang Merchant Guild, known as the greatest of them all, is burning in flames under the moonlight. Everything has been reduced to ashes this night, and not because of some silly dispute with another guild. Several guards' bodies lie lifeless on the wooden floor as the fire consumes the gold coins, but rather at the hands of the terrifying demonic cult, whose leader praises the guild master's sense of justice. The masked invaders watch the defeated master with cold stares amidst the destruction of the place. The masked man reminds him that he is just a simple merchant and not a true martial artist. He then demands that the master hand over the key to that wooden box right away to make things easier. The guild master laughs with disdain and asks if he looks like an idiot who would fall for that tall tale. He provokes the invaders by calling them idiots, says he knows they cannot kill him without the key. He challenges the enemy to cut the box open by force and warns that the contents will be destroyed if they try that. Annoyed by the provocation, the warrior uses a technique on his eyes and asks where the key is. The guild master immediately feels his mind being invaded by a mysterious and overwhelming force. He despairs upon realizing that his own mouth is starting to move against his will. Unable to resist, he ends up revealing that the key is hidden under the master's chair. The masked leader makes a hand signal for one of his subordinates to go get the hidden object. In a few moments, the subordinate raises his hand with the golden key shining in celebration. The master realizes the cult's terrifying control power, but refuses to give up so easily. He then tells the masked leader to stop hesitating and open the box now that he has the key. The masked man holds the golden key and comments that there must be a specific way to use it. With an ironic smile, the master provokes the enemy by asking if he is going to give up so quickly. The leader uses his sorcery again and orders him directly to open the chest without hesitation. While picking up the key, the master internally curses the leader of the martial arts alliance for this. He remembers being guaranteed that the chest was secure, but realizes that against sorcery, that is of no use. He inserts the golden key into the lock while questioning why they left that with him. As he turns the key, the box opens, revealing a mysterious blue glow that illuminates the entire burning room. The master is shocked to see that it is an elixir and is outraged that they destroyed his guild because of one pill. Suddenly, a sharp blade is placed right against the proud wounded merchant's neck. The cult leader says he will hear the man's last words before ending his life for good. The merchant looks back and tries to negotiate by asking how much it would cost to spare his precious life. The enemy warns that the cult followers do not want riches, and the merchant thanks him for helping him decide. The cult leader widens his eyes upon realizing that the merchant is planning something at the last minute. The master puts the shining elixir in his mouth, stating that he will not die being the only one to lose out. He swallows the pill at once and shouts that he always pays his debts, whether out of gratitude or pure resentment. The enemy calls the merchant crazy, while delivering a quick blow to decapitate the man right there. His head flies through the air, while the cult leader screams in fury for having been challenged in that way. The merchant's eyes finally close as his head falls to the cold floor amidst the destruction. Suddenly, a desperate scream echoes from within a peaceful temple situated on an isolated mountain. A young man wakes up terrified, touching his own neck to check if his head is still attached to his body. He looks at his hands, confused, not understanding how he is alive if he clearly remembered being decapitated. Suddenly, someone hits a bamboo stick on the floor to get the startled young man's attention. He raises his head, startled to hear that authoritative voice echoing in the middle of his confused thoughts. A man scolds him severely, asking how a follower of the Taoist path can be so lazy. The young man widens his eyes in complete shock upon recognizing the features of the person standing before him. He wonders if that man really is the Taoist master Chengyan, belonging to the famous Wudong sect. The master confirms it is him and gives the young man a hit on the head, calling him a spoiled brat. While listening to orders to get up, the young man remains totally confused, trying to understand what is happening. He recalls that more than 30 years have passed since he was a simple secular disciple of the Wudang sect. He remembers his former master, but does not understand why the old man is there, identical to how he was in the past. He tries to accept all this time, travel madness, but something even more unbelievable appears before him. A floating parchment screen opens before his eyes with a bizarre list of prices and talents for sale. He observes the floating object and notes that it looks quite like a common bamboo strip. The master tells him to leave the room, while the young man realizes that only he can see that floating item. The young man realizes that that floating bamboo strip might be the only clue to understand everything and decides to read it. Upon reading the description of a talent for swords with a price in silver coins, he wonders if he can buy power. He scrolls through the list, seeing legendary items with absurd prices, and thinks it all completely unrealistic. However, a fast movement item catches his attention for costing only 3 copper coins due to a discount. He remains thoughtful, staring at that cheap and accessible option while trying to come up with a plan to test it. Without hesitation, the young man approaches his grumpy master to ask a very unusual last-minute question. With a sincere and innocent smile on his face, he asks to borrow 3 copper coins from his master. The sect master has a vein bulging with anger on his face upon hearing that ridiculous request for money. A loud thumping sound echoes from outside the temple right after the master reacts furiously to that audacity. The day is sunny and peaceful around the beautiful mountainous structure where the disciples train hard. The young man is now sitting outside, calmly blowing on a blade of grass as if it were a flute. A few days have passed since the incident, and he finally accepts the unbelievable fact of having returned to the past. Playing with the blade, he remembers that the pill he swallowed before dying was called the Divine Demon Pill. He realizes that the legendary medicine really had the mystical power to send someone 30 years back in time. However, he still does not understand the reason why greatly late leader of the Martial Hearts Alliance handed him that item. He stops for a moment and reflects that the simplest solution to survive would just be to avoid receiving that pill. Without that valuable item, the terrible cult would have no reason to attack him, allowing him to live just as a merchant. With the privileged knowledge of the future, he imagines himself becoming incredibly rich and powerful as a merchant. Suddenly, a familiar voice interrupts his daydreams, asking if he was being lazy in that corner. Another young disciple approaches and questions him about the reason why he is not training his martial arts techniques. The boy says with a smile that today is the day of the evaluation. While the protagonist tries to remember his name, he finally remembers that the boy is named Jian Osu and that he is the heir of the influential Wuhan bank family. The protagonist comments, without giving it importance, that they would never become internal disciples of the sect anyway. He points to the ridiculous training of other students and mocks by saying that that is far from being a true style. John Ozu asks about the blades of grass on the floor, and the protagonist reveals that he plans to sell them to the other students. He explains with a cunning smile that training martial arts is just an excuse to make good business contacts. He argues that the young disciples only know fighting and would go crazy to buy any silly toy like these. John Osu is impressed by his sharp mentality and praises his natural talent for business. The protagonist recalls internally that Jian Ozu will become the powerful master of the Wuhan Bank in the future. He reflects that getting closer to Osu is an excellent business opportunity and agrees to sell a flute to him. The protagonist asks for exactly 3 copper coins for the grass flute and receives the payment immediately. The young man says goodbye, wishing good sales, and walks away waving, while the protagonist continues watching. With the 3 copper coins shining in his hands, he celebrates finally having obtained the necessary money. He stares at the floating parchment and wonders how exactly he should go about activating the purchase of the desired talent. He mentalizes the purchase of the agile movement, while the copper coins in his hand start to turn into pure light. A floating message notifies that the purchase was completed successfully, and the shock makes the young man widen his eyes. He closes his hands thoughtfully upon noting that the purchase requires only the power of thought, but feels no physical difference. Suddenly, a shrill scream of pain echoes through the training courtyard, calling the young man's immediate attention. He sees a smaller boy humiliating another older student after defeating him with extreme ease in the fight. The arrogant boy advances, saying he should break both of the opponent's arms for dishonoring martial arts. The older student gets furious at being humiliated in such an outrageous way by a child from the internal sect. The brat challenges the opponent to try to face him and goes on the attack at an impressive speed. With impressive agility, the small warrior firmly holds the rival's hand before he can even react. Completely in shock and sweating from nerves, the older student wonders how the boy manages to be so fast. The boy mocks, asking if a mere secular disciple really thought he would defeat someone from the internal sect with ease. The protagonist observes the scene seriously and decides it is the perfect moment to intervene in the cowardice. He approaches calmly from behind and touches the arrogant boy's shoulder, interrupting the physical aggression. Making a respectful bow, he introduces himself formally as the secular disciple Manhwa. He asks politely with a smile on his face for the boy to release his colleague's arm before they talk. The arrogant boy refuses and says angrily that they can talk plenty after he breaks that arm. Manhwa confesses casually that he actually doesn't care at all about what happens to that guy. The boy from the internal sect is completely confused, not understanding the cold and unexpected attitude of the newcomer. With an ambitious look, the protagonist says he has an excellent product and suggests the boy take a look before deciding. A loud, high-pitched blowing sound suddenly echoes through the courtyard, calling the attention of everyone present nearby. The melody catches the attention of someone important who was hidden, watching the training from afar. Firm steps begin to approach, while the curious person wonders who is responsible for that sound. From atop a rock, the master watches the young man skillfully playing that small blade of grass. The high-pitched sound continues to resonate through the imposing structure of the temple under the clear and sunny sky. The protagonist stops playing and thinks that it really is very difficult to play that flute as well as Jian Ozu. Upon seeing the bright little eyes of admiration of the younger students, he clears his throat, knowing that was already enough. The little Manhwa points to the toy and asks shyly if they could also try to play that. Manhwa moves the item away and warns that the toy loses its value as soon as it touches the lips. Leaving the children sad, he changes his tone quickly and warns that specific demonstration flute is different from all the others. He announces that the normal price would be 5 copper coins, but he will make a much cheaper offer for being a display model. He offers the toy for the value of only 3 copper coins, leaving the little disciples excited. The children's enthusiasm disappears instantly, and they become crestfallen, clenching their own hands in shame. The protagonist is confused upon noting that their reaction was totally different from what he had planned initially. He tries to save the deal by suggesting a big discount if they buy in larger quantity, but is interrupted by a boy. The boys admit shyly that, in fact, they don't usually carry any kind of money with them through the temple. The boy cries in frustration, asking if he can buy on credit or trade for another item to not be embarrassed. Her protagonist sighs despondently upon realizing that children isolated in the mountains training with swords would not have coins. He remembers that his real goal was never their money, but rather creating strong connections with future masters of the sect. He decides that just playing with them about the lack of coins was already enough to break the ice for now. He surprises the little disciples by announcing that he will simply give a flute as a gift to them. The protagonist strikes a humble pose, saying it is a great honor to gift the young talents of the main sect. The boy wipes his nose proudly and praises the respectful attitude of the secular guy for recognizing their importance. With eyes shining with happiness, the child extends both hands to accept the valuable gift with gratitude. He knows that Manhwa will become the legendary invincible sword master of the Wudang sect in the future of this new life. He celebrates the success of the contact but is interrupted by the threatening sound of a sword being unsheathed behind his back. A sharp, bluish blade passes by, cutting the wind close to the startled protagonist's cheek in the blink of an eye. A man in a blue tunic appears, pointing the weapon at him, and asks rudely who he thinks he is. The warrior demands to know the reason the young man is trying to deceive the young disciples with such insignificant tricks. Upon analyzing the man's blue uniform, the protagonist realizes that he must belong to the renowned Cheong elite generation. He deduces that the man is the boy's instructor and laments how these fighters always resort to violence so quickly. Mukwyung notes that the little students next to the teacher were scared and sad with that violent reaction. He grinds his teeth, thinking about how people in this environment tend to find anything outside of martial combat vulgar. He vents by sighing and asks if enjoying a bit of childish music has now become some kind of heinous crime. The elite master narrows his eyes with deep irritation upon hearing the insolent and courageous comment of the secular guy. Without being shaken by the obvious threat of the sword, the protagonist begins to cite an old sect proverb calmly. He recites the teaching about the mind being the only thing that really hesitates when the archer pulls the bowstring. He concludes the proverb by firmly stating that the target always remains exactly at the same distance from the shooter. He argues that if that is just a harmless trick, it shouldn't bother someone with such an enlightened mind. The master looks at the blade of grass thrown on the stone floor while remaining in absolute silence to reflect. The warrior breaks the silence by stating that the secular guy is extremely cheeky and insolent for speaking like that to him. Suddenly, a blue aura of overwhelming energy begins to emanate from the teacher's body, threatening to crush the opponent. He asks coldly if he should consider that bold attitude as a grave direct offense to the rules of his sect. The protagonist trembles a little with the pressure, but soon realizes that the warrior is just trying to intimidate him. He calms down knowing that even if the main sect is rigorous, they would never kill a training colleague for something so silly. Thinking about that, the young man decides to close his hands in a solemn gesture of respect to respond to the challenging enemy. He shouts firmly, stating that even under a strong storm, he will continue advancing without ever hesitating. The master in the blue tunic gives a slight smile at the corner of his mouth upon realizing the enormous determination of that secular guy. He lets out a loud laugh, praising the young man's good spirit for speaking his mind, even under strong spiritual pressure. The protagonist feigns reverence while thinking that mystical pressure almost made him turn his stomach for real. The man decides to buy all the grass flutes and asks the protagonist what would be the total price for all of them. The warrior tries to haggle by asking about the wholesale discount, but here's the discount is exclusive to minors. With a mischievous smile, he provokes by asking if a great master of the famous sect would want to pay the child's price. Finding the boy incredibly cheeky, the master withdraws a payment slip to hand to the young merchant. He hands over 100 note and says for him to keep the generous change as compensation for the scare from before. While the children play their flutes happily, the master asks his name and discovers that he is named Mukwyung. Next, the young man asks politely what the master's name is, revealing that he really had no idea who he was. With a friendly and sympathetic smile on his face, the man reveals directly that his real name is Cheongwa. He is known as the Boundless Divine Sword, an elite fighter who will futurely become one of the 8 venerables. The protagonist feels a chill down his spine upon realizing that he just haggled with a legendary warrior of that level. He immediately makes a friendly bow, thinking that he would never have responded that way if he had known the truth. The master asks casually if the young man finally understood with whom he was being insolent just now. However, the protagonist argues that just as the sect has its rules, a good merchant must also follow his path. The master in the blue tunic just lets out a slight sigh, thinking the boy is a cheeky but very interesting brat. He comments smiling that the guy simply doesn't accept losing the last word and begins to move away from there. The protagonist finally lets out a long sigh of relief and touches his chest, trying to calm his racing heart. Suddenly, another voice arises from the shadows, praising his enormous courage for speaking that way to a legendary warrior. He makes a grimace upon noting that he barely managed to get through a big obstacle, and now another annoying subject appears to bother him. The bald and muscular man approaches with a cynical smile, introducing himself formally as Sagong Haon. The protagonist knows very well that that guy is the worst scum that exists among all the secular disciples. Sagong Haon feigns friendliness, but the young man remembers perfectly that that bald man was the only culprit for his expulsion from the sect. The big guy rubs his chin thoughtfully while asking to confirm if the protagonist's name is Muk Wayang. He comments that he heard rumors about a son of the Supreme King having joined the sect and thought it was him. The protagonist denies the rumors coldly, saying that in fact he came only from a common peasant family from the countryside. Sagong Haon laments with mockery, questioning how someone of such simple origin could survive in that cruel world. He then feigns generosity, saying that being like that, he will have no other choice but to become his new friend. Upon seeing that extended hand, the protagonist remembers that in his past life, he ended up accepting that fake handshake. For not having talent or influence at the time, he naively thought that that friendship was the great chance of his life. However, everything changed completely for the worse at the moment when a grave incident ended up happening in the sect. The master gathered everyone in the courtyard with a furious expression, holding a bag full of books confiscated from the dormitory. He threw the prohibited books directly onto the stone floor to expose the grave rule infraction committed there. The other disciples began to whisper, scared at seeing those publications of totally inappropriate content. Upon looking at the book covers, the protagonist recognized right away they were the materials that the bald guy kept reading. He remembered that the bald guy refused to lend the books and smiled, thinking that the wrongdoer had finally been caught. However, the master pointed his finger, accusing Muk Wayang of being the true owner of all those inappropriate magazines. While the master shouts about heresy, Sagong Haon whistles cynically, pretending he has nothing to do with the subject. The enraged instructor cuts the justifications, yelling with anger that he would not accept any kind of excuse from him. Protagonist was left without reaction upon hearing the master's direct sentence that he was officially expelled from the sect. He clenches his fists with hate, remembering that the bald guy read everything alone and later put all the blame unjustly on him. In the past he was weak and could not take revenge, but now he slapped Sagong Haon's extended hand without the slightest hesitation. He rejects the offer with disdain, stating loudly and clearly that this time things will be completely different. The protagonist provokes the bald big guy by asking if he feels like a king just for knowing a little bit of fighting. He warns that being the son of a fifth-rate sect leader is no big deal, and that seeing him strike a pose makes him sick. To finish the humiliation, the young man points his finger right in his face and tells him to become a man, leaving the big guy furious. The master of ceremonies, or the opponent himself, advances, taking a firm step on the floor while preparing to react. Sagong Haon approaches furiously and says he thought he was good at talking, but realizes he is just a madman without fear of death. The protagonist smiles boldly and provokes the big guy by asking if he really has the courage to hit him there. He challenges the rival by asking if he wants to go for physical fighting, right there to be expelled from the sect together. The big guy remains in absolute silence while a vein of extreme anger jumps on his bald head due to the provocation. Without being able to fight there, the bully swallows hard and makes one last threat, telling the protagonist to be very careful. Muk Wayang observes the rival moving away and laments with mockery because he wouldn't mind fighting and being expelled now. He knows he needs to find a way to get out of there soon to manage to use the memories of his past life in the best way. If he can't, he decides he will have to come up with some intelligent strategy during the next student evaluation. Suddenly, his colleague Jian Ozu calls him out loud, running in his direction with a very worried face. He asks what is wrong with the protagonist and questions him about what he will do. He has to face Haon in the arena. The protagonist just responds optimistically that the fights are drawn and that he will deal with it when the time comes. Internally, he knows that it is not optimism, but rather the fact of remembering that his opponent will be one of Hyen's henchmen. He remembers that in his past life, he suffered a crushing defeat for being weak, and that now everything must repeat itself in the arena. The young man holds the small stone firmly in his hands, knowing that the only difference now is that he has an ace up his sleeve. The night finally falls over the mountains, and the main courtyard of the sect becomes totally illuminated for the big event. The combat between the secular disciples begins intensely with the students exchanging fierce punches in the arena. The master of ceremonies observes the fights with a bored look, supporting his face on his hand without seeing any great talent. The legendary warrior Chiangwa approaches from behind and comments calmly that the youth evaluation has already begun. The instructor greets him, surprised, and asks what brings him there, since he himself had asked to evaluate the students first. The instructor comments that there really is no disciple there worth receiving the attention of an elite warrior. Chiangwa questions if the draws weren't random, and the instructor confesses that he has been changing the keys on purpose. The legendary warrior listens to that and becomes a bit thoughtful while observing the boys preparing for the fight. Mook Hwayong and Jian Ozu observe the combat from afar, while the protagonist takes the opportunity to blow his grass flute. Chioma supports his arms imposingly while deciding to take an unexpected attitude to stir up the tournament. He asks, smiling, if he can change the next combat personally, and the instructor agrees without hesitating much. The master gives permission for him to do whatever he wants, and the instructor prepares to announce the next draw of the tournament. The protagonist's name is announced loud and clear in the courtyard, and he begins to head calmly toward the arena. Mook Hwayong warns his training colleague that he will be back in moments, while waving from behind in a very relaxed way. He steps into the center of the illuminated arena under everyone's gaze, while the instructor prepares to reveal his opponent. To everyone's surprise, the instructor shouts the name of the terrible Sagong Hyon as his great adversary of the night. The protagonist looks back, startled, not understanding why the hell he had to face the worst rival right from the start like that. He realizes right away that the blame for that could only have been meddling legendary warrior who changed the key. The instructor shouts authoritatively, declaring that if both are ready, the combat must start at once. The bald big guy smiles perversely, thinking that his great chance to teach the rival a lesson came very quickly. He yells, cursing the protagonist, and starts for him like a rabid bull with all his brutal physical strength. The bald guy yells, remembering his old threat, and delivers a violent punch, trying to crush the protagonist right there. The young man grinds his teeth and dodges at the last second, thinking that that difficult fight was not in his plans. However, he recovers quickly and thinks that his main objective of defeating the rival remains exactly the same. He yells for the bald guy to swallow that and throws by surprise a blinding dust right into the big guy's eyes in the arena. With the cunning and victorious smile on his face, the protagonist takes advantage of the perfect gap created by his dirty trick. The big guy screams in pain with eyes burning and tries to hit the wind blindly, completely disoriented in the arena. The protagonist prepares his right fist with determination while positioning himself to apply his great counter attack. He applies with precision the Three Calamities combat technique, delivering a violent punch right on the bald guy's chin. Without giving the rival time to breathe, the young man adds a second brutal punch, stating that just one blow would be little. Suddenly, the protagonist stops, surprised upon noting that his own body is feeling incredibly light and fast. The furious opponent manages to recover consciousness in time and grabs the protagonist's fist with enormous brutal strength. Next, the big guy uses his weight to throw the protagonist with violence directly onto the arena's stone floor. Fallen, the young man thinks with worry that he ended up getting too excited and delivered two punches before even realizing it. The bald guy bleeds from his mouth and grinds his teeth with eyes shining in pure hate at the public humiliation he suffered. He roars, stating that he will kill the protagonist once and for all, while the young man tries to come up with his next move. The instructor shouts furiously, asking how he dares use such dirty tricks worthy of evil factions. But suddenly the master feels a firm hand touch his shoulder and turns around startled to see who interrupted him. Chiangwa asks for calm with a serene look while keeping his hand supported firmly on his shoulder. The legendary warrior suggests, with a calm smile, that they should just watch the fight for some more time. He comments that the young man seems to have a plan in mind, while Mok Wai-yang tries to recover on the arena floor. Saegong Hyeon raises his leg with brutality and prepares to deliver a violent stomp against the fallen adversary. The big guy hits the blow, destroying the stone floor, but the protagonist manages to dodge with agility. The young man positions himself firmly at a short distance, while observing the rival's next step attentively. The bald guy tries to land a quick punch, but the protagonist widens his eyes and manages to dodge the attack in time. With quick and extremely precise steps, he slides through the arena floor, positioning himself for the counter-attack. Mok Wai-yang delivers a powerful and accurate punch straight onto the big guy's cheek, who can barely react to the blow. The young man stares at his own fist, surprised upon noting that the Three Calamities technique is flowing naturally. Saegong Hyeon grinds his teeth, feeling intense pain, and lets out a moan of pure frustration after being hit again. The protagonist realizes that the only difference from his past life was having bought the fast movement technique. The bald guy roars with hate, delivering another desperate blow, but the guy manages to dodge with extreme ease. He wonders if just he purchased from the system was able to change his physical skills so quickly. The protagonist takes advantage of the gap and hits another overwhelming punch right onto the big guy's face, who screams in pain. With the force of the impact, the big guy staggers, totally stunned, and almost loses consciousness before everyone. Mok Wai-yang opens a wide smile upon realizing that system ability is ridiculously powerful. He thinks that he needs more money to get strong and decides that he should focus on his business as soon as possible. Suddenly, the protagonist hears a trembling voice coming from behind and turns around with a confused and suspicious expression. Saegong Hyeon wipes the blood from his mouth and swears with a murderous look that he will end the guy's life without hesitation. The young man feels that the opponent's presence has changed drastically and wonders if he will release his internal energy. The big guy lets out a long sigh of hot air while focusing all his mystical strength to intensify the combat. The bald guy advances, delivering quick and powerful attacks, leaving the protagonist surprised by the difference in power. Mok Wai-yang realizes that his feet have reached the edge of the arena and that he has no more space to retreat. While dodging the blows, he begins to question himself if he will really not manage to defeat the stronger rival. The opponent roars furiously and prepares a last concentrated attack to knock out the young man once and for all. Without possessing internal energy, the protagonist knows that it would be impossible to win that dispute using only common punches. But before the blows meet, the legendary Chiangwa appears in the middle of the arena and interrupts the combat with a command. The master in the blue tunic holds his sheath, sword majestically, maintaining absolute peace in the training place. He scolds the big guy, stating that using internal energy against a beginner is something unforgivable even for villains. The bald guy stutters from nerves, claiming in his defense that the protagonist was the one who used a dirty trick first in the fight. Chiangwa looks to the side thoughtfully and agrees that the big guy's complaint also has its foundation. He scolds the protagonist for using tactics worthy of a street criminal being a disciple of the great sect. The master warns that he will decide a suitable punishment for the young man, who only accepts the order submissively. Next, the legendary warrior officially declares the evaluation round of all disciples closed. Mok Wai-yang celebrates discreetly with himself for having achieved all his goals set for today. He celebrates for having hit the rival and also for getting a nice excuse to finally be expelled from the sect. under the moonlight, he already begins to plan various brilliant business ideas to put into practice soon. Meanwhile, the legendary warrior, Chiangwa, walks in silence with a very serious and thoughtful expression. The instructor approaches him asking if everything is okay, and the master responds questioning why it wouldn't be. The instructor states angrily that Muk Wayang must be expelled soon for having planned that trick since the beginning. Chiangwa just closes his eyes in silence, keeping his thoughts guarded while listening to the harsh complaints. He then questions the instructor if he didn't pay attention to the extraordinary speed that the guy demonstrated. The master remembers that the young man clearly doesn't know any other style, but managed to perform perfect movements. He highlights that the boy performed the basic combat techniques with impeccable and surprising steps in the arena. The warrior concludes by stating that all this just proves that the young man in fact hides an overwhelming martial talent. The instructor agrees thoughtfully but remembers that the rigid rules of the sect would require that some punishment be applied. He stares at the legendary warrior with a serious look, waiting anxiously to know what the final decision will be. Chiangwa remains thoughtful, wondering what would be the most suitable punishment to apply to the cheeky young man. The instructor announces out loud that the protagonist should serve temporarily at the sect's Gokjan Pavilion. He states harshly that the decision was made by Chiangwa and that the guy should be very grateful. The man moves away, grumbling indignantly for his elite companion not having simply expelled the boy. The protagonist is left completely shocked upon realizing that they simply refused to expel him from there. He despairs, remembering that in the past he was expelled just because of prohibited magazines in an unjust way. The young man laments deeply because that unexpected decision ends up totally hindering his plans. His colleague Jeon Ozu tries to calm him down, saying that at least he didn't end up being expelled from the sect's lands. The friend encourages him to train even harder to, who knows, become a respected internal disciple. The protagonist reacts with disdain, thinking that that talk of martial talent makes no sense. He remembers that in his past life, he tried in every way to learn martial arts, but failed miserably. The young man recognizes that yesterday's miracle in the arena only happened thanks to the mystical talent store of the parchment. The protagonist decides to leave those thoughts aside and focuses on the current reality in which he finds himself now. He warns his training colleague that he is already going to the pavilion, and the friend says goodbye, wishing good luck. He sighs despondently, realizing that his great chance to be expelled right from the start went down the drain. Upon entering the Gokjan Pavilion, he remembers that they take care of finances there and thinks about embezzling some gold coins. But suddenly the protagonist stops and realizes that he ended up thinking about that whole situation too simply. He widens his eyes upon seeing the master in the blue tunic smiling in an extremely friendly way right before him. The boy is confused, wondering if that legendary elite warrior in fact works in that pavilion. The master explains that he works in another sector and reveals that the guy's task there will be to act only as a messenger. The boy repeats the word confused, trying to process what in fact that new function would mean for him. He realizes that the other locations are in distant peaks and that without fast, stepping techniques it would be impossible. The elite warrior tries to reassure him, saying with a smile that he will serve only as extra help. Believing it to be fate, the master decides to teach the mountain's geography personally and orders the guy to follow him. He gives a slight look back to verify if his new and reluctant disciple really is following him. The protagonist lets out a totally yellow smile, knowing very well that he just got himself into a big problem. The dark and silent night finally falls over the beautiful traditional structures of the great Taoist temple. In his room, the boy remembers that some sectors of the mountain require dangerous climbs through the steep rocks. He opens the door carefully, thinking he doesn't want to risk his new and precious life falling from one of those cliffs. With extremely silent steps, he walks in the dark, trying to come up with the best conclusion to get out of there soon. He decides that the best path to follow is to simply run away from there through the shadows before dawn. The young man runs with determination through the silent arena, knowing that that night escape is his only logical way out. The full moon shines intensely in the clear sky, illuminating the imposing entrance gate of the great Wudang sect. The guy stops for a moment and places his hand on his chin, thinking in a concentrated way about his next steps. He enters a narrow path in the forest and encounters an almost absolute darkness that leaves him apprehensive. He holds the mystical voucher handed by the elite master, but laments deeply because the system store does not accept it. Without being able to use the voucher's money, he realizes he will have no other choice but to improvise in a common way. He lights a makeshift fire torch and decides he will need to force his passage amidst that darkness. The boy goes down the stone stairs, knowing that the light will make him an easy target, but prefers that to falling into the dark abyss. With a confident smile, he thinks that the mountain is gigantic and that no one would be able to find him so quickly. But upon making the turn on the stone path, the guy freezes, from shock upon noting two silhouettes standing right before him. The young man encounters two sect guards, who stare at him with suspicion and realizes that his escape failed right on the spot. One of the guards points a sharp blade, demanding identification, and the guy lies, desperate, saying to be collecting herbs. He invents a relaxed story, claiming that he ended up sleeping in the grove while gathering the medicinal plants. The watchman suspects the guy's silly excuse, but the boy insists on the lie, extending his hands to prove the point. The protagonist displays some common green leaves that he pulled from the ground in the rush, pretending to be medicinal plants. The two guards whisper between themselves, confused, looking at the leaves without knowing if those really are medical herbs. The young man sighs with relief for his disguise working, knowing that common warriors would never understand anything about botany. The guard finally returns the fire torch and asks him to take great care when going down the steep slope. The protagonist celebrates the success of his makeshift disguise and runs down the stairs with fast steps. He spots the big gate right ahead and runs thinking that his freedom will be guaranteed if he manages to pass from there. The young man opens a victorious and cunning smile, believing piously that nothing else would be able to stop his escape now. However, he freezes from shock in the middle of the path upon hearing someone calling his name directly in the shadows. A voice asks where he is going with such haste, and the young man recognizes right away that very familiar tone. The protagonist feels his stomach turn from nerves while noticing the smile of whoever is waiting for him. Chialma appears before him and asks, smiling, if the guy really thought his escape would go unnoticed. The young man grinds his teeth in complete despair upon seeing the legendary elite warrior blocking his path again. Mkwayung lowers his head defeated and asks directly how the master discovered his escape plan. The elite warrior just smiles and asks if the young man underestimates so much the visual perception of a master. He explains that the human face reveals intentions, and that the muscles that move involuntarily do not lie. With cold sweat running down his face, the protagonist asks what the powerful warrior intends to do with him. Chionhua narrows his eyes and warns that before deciding anything, he wishes to hear a sincere answer from him. He points to the portal and asks the reason the young man wants so much to go away if thousands dream of entering there. The boy argues that he knows his limits, and that he would fail in the final combat test against the official disciples. He makes an expression of extreme modesty and states with head down that he simply does not possess the necessary talent. The master in the blue tunic stares at him fixedly and counters by saying that the boy, in fact, didn't even try to make an effort. The boy insists that he is a lost cause, but the legendary warrior warns that he can see through his lies. He asks for absolute honesty and guarantees secrecy, revealing that in fact he thinks the boy's talent is extraordinary. The young man holds his forehead, not knowing what to say, because he could never reveal that his techniques come from the system store. After thinking for a few moments, the protagonist decides to look into the master's eyes to give an answer. He puffs out his chest and shouts with pride that the Wudang sect simply is not a vase big enough for him, An absolute and awkward silence settles under the imposing portal while the master just stares at him without blinking. The guy starts to sweat cold from regret, wondering if he ended up going too far with that arrogant speech. Worried, he asks if the master is okay upon noticing that the man's body started to shake in a strange way. Cheonghwa lets out a slight laugh and states with tranquility that now he understands perfectly the young man's thinking. The protagonist opens a huge ear-to-ear smile, thinking that he finally received permission to go away. But his happiness lasts very little when the master simply responds with a short and direct negation. The elite warrior unsheathes his sword and warns that as a member of the sect he cannot accept such an insult with arms crossed. He raises the shining blade with determination and promises to show him the true essence of martial arts. A mystical and bluish energy, extremely powerful, begins to emanate from the sharp blade, cutting the night wind. The protagonist protects his own face, startled by the violent wind that appears out of nowhere around the master. He realizes that that is not just a common wind, but rather the overwhelming release of pure internal energy. The legendary warrior floats in the air majestically with his sword shining under the dark mountain sky. A circular bluish energy wave expands through the silent arena, leaving the young man completely motionless from shock. The elite master stares at him seriously and orders firmly that the guy observes each movement with much attention. He initiates the execution of his technique, with steps that seem to slide smoothly through the arena's stone floor. The legendary warrior executes an impeccable sword dance, creating shining blue energy trails through the air. Mook Hwayoung watches all that mystical demonstration with widened eyes, and thinks about how beautiful that is. He notes that the elite master's movement is as fluid and smooth as the water of a river that flows calmly. At the same time, each attack delivered carries an overwhelming fury comparable to a strong current in the rocks. The blows succeed each other continuously and without pauses, resembling the infinite movement of the ocean waves. He understands that that perfect sequence of movements reveals the true secret of the grand sect. The elite warrior finalizes his demonstration of the legendary Kateji technique under the silvery glow of the full moon. A gigantic shining Taiji symbol appears drawn on the stone floor under the feet of the two fighters in the arena. The protagonist remains static and completely speechless before the grandeur of what he just witnessed. The master in the blue tunic sheathes his sword and asks calmly if the guy finally managed to understand. The young man remains in silence for a few seconds, but soon confesses that in fact there is only one doubt in his mind. He questions, confused, what exactly he should do with that grand demonstration being just a messenger. The master supports his hand on his sword handle and reminds him that it was he who questioned the capacity to harbor him in the sect. He then extends his hand with a mystical aura and warns that that is why he insisted on showing the sect's true strength. Cheonghwa keeps his hand shining with mystical energy while staring at the young man who remains static. The elite master states with total certainty that there exists no type of person that the sect cannot manage to harbor. The protagonist hits his hand on his forehead, indignant, thinking how these martial fighters always summarize everything to physical combat. He realizes that trying to persuade him with words would be useless and decides to change his strategy totally from there. The boy apologizes sincerely for his previous arrogant comment, but soon adds an important condition. He shouts with all his strength, stating that even so he simply cannot continue living in Wudang. The master in the blue tunic just stares at him serenely and asks calmly what would be the real reason for that. The guy yells, saying that it is just BS, and challenges him to take some drastic attitude against his decision. He argues that if the interested party himself says not to want, the master should not force him to continue in the temple. The master counters by saying that he has no idea of the talent he has, and the guy just makes a face of pure confusion. The elite man turns away, commenting that he would never let a talented child throw himself into the well of his own failure. The protagonist remains in silence, trying to understand what passes in the mind of that experienced Taoist warrior. The master decrees authoritatively that the guy simply does not have permission to leave from there without his direct order. He remembers that the boy's father made donations for him to enter, states that the parents would be proud of that guardianship. Muk Wayung yells in despair, asking for which reason the master wants so much to keep him imprisoned in that place. He lies again desperately, stating that in fact he is just the son of a humble common farmer. The guy questions the reason for such a rich and grand sect wanting to insist on holding someone insignificant. He cries out desperately to obtain a logical and definitive explanation about that whole madness of guardianship. The legendary warrior just gives a slight, mysterious smile, demonstrating that he does not intend to yield to his provocations. The master raises his finger playfully and repeats the same words of the guy, saying it is just because yes. The following day dawns sunny and quiet in the beautiful mountains right after the failed night escape of the young man. The protagonist stares at the huge identification plate, totally discouraged upon becoming a temporary disciple. The master in the blue tunic explains that it will be very difficult to supervise his training being just a layman. He reveals that he wanted to accept him as official, but the sect leader suspected him and allowed only the temporary one. The master encourages the young man, raising his fist and guarantees that with effort, he will be able to become official at any time. The boy hides his face of frustration, thinking that to manage to buy the system's talents, he will need money. He questions himself if he should simply open the game about the system and explain that he only gets strong by earning coins. The young man walks thoughtful and deduces that if he managed to obtain any amount of money, he could come up with another escape. Suddenly, the protagonist's eyes shine intensely upon having a spark of a brilliant last-minute idea. He turns quickly in his tutor's direction and calls him out loud with an extremely enthusiastic expression. Without the slightest shame in his face, the guy asks directly if the master by chance would have any money with him. The elite master is left completely without reaction, commenting to be the first time in life that someone asks him for money. The boy scratches his cheek awkwardly and explains that he wishes just to exchange the mystical voucher from before for real coins. The master comments that he will not use coins in the mountain, but the protagonist just admits sincerely that he loves money. The elite warrior agrees to make the exchange for the voucher and asks for the guy to wait a moment there while he solves it. They enter the finance pavilion, and the protagonist discovers by surprise that he will fulfill his punishment serving right there. The master displays a large necklace full of shining bronze coins, leaving the boy extremely excited. However, he warns that he will keep that entire amount until the guy's mandatory services are totally concluded. Muk Wayung despairs and shouts indignantly, stating that that money by right already belongs to him. The master counters laughing, but the boy complains angry, claiming that money in the present is worth much more than in the future. The master plays, asking if he wants to charge interest, and the boy responds furiously, demanding his coins back. Ignoring the protests, the legendary warrior begins to keep the bronze coins inside his tunic in a calm way. He approaches smiling and confesses to have certainty that the young man would to escape again if he were with the money. The master moves away, guaranteeing that he will hand over everything at the end of the service, and the protagonist just murmurs uncomfortably. Suddenly, a loud noise coming from the interior of the pavilion interrupts the discussion of the two, calling their attention. A man appears coming down the stairs, complaining sleepily that the loud chatter outside put an end to his sleep. The master in the blue tunic greets him with respect, revealing that the man is his elite colleague Chiang Su. Chiowa plays about the pavilion director position, but the friend counters, saying dryly that he was demoted to there. The new boss analyzes the boy, commenting that he doesn't have a fighter's physique, but accepts that the young man possesses certain talent. With a satisfied smile, the master in the blue tunic makes a friendly bow and leaves his pupil under his care. Chiang Su lets out a heavy sigh while observing the other master move away calmly through the pavilion. Hwa-young wonders what he should do now and suspects that the two masters are plotting something behind his back. He continues thoughtful, trying to decipher the doe's plan while preparing for any unpleasant surprise. Without another choice but to follow the game's flow, he decides to accompany the master, who orders the guide to follow him. The man warns that the service schedule will be from 5 in the morning until 7 at night directly, and without beating around the bush. The master orders the delivery of bamboo tubes to the Cheong Pavilion, leaving the young disciple paralyzed from shock. He despairs upon remembering that the pavilion is situated right at the steep and dangerous top of Wuding Mountain. The guy complains that he still hasn't learned fast stepping techniques and that the shipments will certainly delay a lot. He swallows dry with a tense expression upon noticing that there is another big problem waiting for him right ahead. The boy is horrified upon seeing that the amount of deliveries is absurdly gigantic for just one person to carry. He throws himself on the floor, yelling that he will not do that in any way because he would certainly fall to his death on the way. The master counters coldly, saying he will have to expel him for negligence, leaving the guy in a complete state of shock. The man remembers that even being a temporary student, he is still considered officially a member of the main sect. The master warns somberly that the expulsion will result in the total destruction of his danshin as an exemplary punishment. The young man knows that losing the danshin means living forever as a cripple without strength even for simple tasks. The master wishes good luck and retires, ordering the guy to introduce himself in his room as soon as he finishes all the work. He clenches his fists with anger, realizing that Master Chiangwa planned all this by making him a temporary disciple. Grumbling with frustration, the boy begins to keep the heavy bamboo tubes inside the bag to initiate the route. With the burden tied on his back, he curses that situation repeatedly while preparing for the worst effort. He holds with extreme strength onto the rough stone edges, so as not to plummet straight into the mountain's deep abyss. The boy climbs the vertical slope, cursing the members of the sect with fury and promising revenge for that suffering. The sun begins to rise on the horizon, illuminating the imposing mountain rocks under a sky in purple and gold tones. An exhausted hand finally reaches the flat top of the rock after a climb that lasted the whole night of suffering. The young man drags himself through the stone floor, letting out a moan of pure exhaustion, and with his teeth clenched from physical tiredness, he collapses on his back on the ground, breathing heavily and thinking seriously that he will die from so much tiredness there. He opens a smile admiring the beautiful morning landscape, while another disciple of the sect approaches walking calmly. The man asks if he is the messenger, and the guy confirms happily, explaining the reason for his exhausting visit. But the warrior throws another bad on the floor and asks with harshness the reason he took so long to arrive there. The man warns that there are still many pending deliveries and that he will not be able to return home before finishing the service. The boy closes his eyes and gives a serene smile, trying to keep calm before such injustice against his body. He observes the mountain valley, cursing silently the members of the sect for making him go through this torture. The following day, Master Chiang Su comes out of his pavilion in a calm way and yawning under the sunlight of the morning. He stops walking upon noting a familiar presence at his side and turns with a very intrigued expression. Master Chiangwa approaches with a friendly smile and asks what ended up happening with young Hwa-young. Chiang Su responds irritated, asking if he really has the nerve to ask that cynical question. Chiangwa asks if there is some problem and hears that he possesses an extremely twisted and evil sense of humor. He explains that the Cheong Slope is a mystical place that guards the greatest secret of fast stepping techniques. Without understanding perfectly the theory of this movement style, any climb attempt becomes impossible. A simple mistake of footing on the steep slope can make the practitioner slip and lose totally his grip. It deals with a cliff so scary that performing the climb just once already represents a colossal challenge of life. Chiao admits he suggested the place, but remembers that it was the older brother who ordered the guy to climb late at night. Su reflects that climbing that cliff in the dark of the night would be impossible, even for the most talented of geniuses. Cheonghwa comments with tranquility that he realized that common ordeals would not make any sense for that guy. He moves away, warning that he will take care of the remaining shipments, and orders the colleague to verify the quantity by himself. Curious response, the master approaches the pavilion door to inspect personally what is happening. Su hears his training brother call him and realizes that there is something extremely unusual happening in the pavilion. With a mysterious smile, the elite warrior states that in fact there is absolutely nothing strange there. He reveals that the young disciple already performed the delivery of all pending packages and is sleeping quietly. The elite master highlights impressed that the guy managed to conclude all that work in a single night. He concludes that by the enormous amount of cargo the boy had to climb and go down the dangerous cliff at least 3 times. The master is astonished for never having seen anyone dominate the complex technique of steps right on the first day of climbing. During the night climb, one of the bamboo tubes starts to slip from his delivery backpack to the abyss. Quick as a lightning, the young man stretches his free hand and manages to grab the bamboo tube firmly at the last second. Without having how to keep the item, he decides to bite the bamboo tube with strength to keep his 2 hands free. The master reflects that the boy really represents the true meaning of existing a genius above another. He laments that if the guy had entered the sect 10 years before, he would have become the biggest pillar of the martial world. Su is extremely surprised to hear the young man murmur, calling for an older brother during sleep. Master Cheonghwa observes with affection the exhausted guy, who sleeps deeply wrapped in a thick blanket. He smiles at the corner, thinking that now that he knows the boy's potential, he must press him even more in the trainings. Hwayoung finally begins to wake up sleepy, letting out a confused murmur and cleaning the saliva from his chin. He stretches on the wooden floor, remembering with dread he thought how he was going to die during the climb yesterday. The young man thanks mentally the system store for having bought the talent that saved his life and notes the blanket. He gets a scare upon seeing the master of the pavilion before him, asking harshly if he is already so tired. The master orders out loud for him to get up soon at once and stop laziness now that he is well awake. The boy returns the skin blanket, asking if it was the master who covered him, and hears a complaint about his saliva. The man says for him to do what he wants with the item, and the young man decides to keep it, although he thinks the master is very grumpy. While the boy arranges his things in a hurried way, the master observes him in silence with an analytical look. The master orders the guy to collect the orders in the room next door, and orders to accompany him for a new route. He warns that both need to go together to a specific place, and the young man accompanies him to the pavilion entrance. They begin to walk side by side, following a beaten dirt trail that cuts the temple grounds. The protagonist follows his superior, keeping the backpack on his back while observing the path with suspicion. He realizes that that route leads back to the same cliff and wonders if he will have to perform deliveries again. Suddenly, the master throws a blue fabric band right into the face of the startled guy, who almost loses his balance. Holding the piece of blue cloth, the boy is totally confused and asks what the reason to receive that item is. The master orders directly for him to use the blue band to cover completely his eyes before the test. He points to the steep cliff and orders the young man to perform the entire climb again like that. Extremely irritated with that bizarre order, the boy throws the cloth band on the dirt ground with a lot of strength. He yells furiously, questioning if the master thinks he is capable of climbing a dangerous abyss blindfolded. The boy states he will not obey such an absurd order, while the master just lets out a sigh of boredom, being enough just a slight threat of having his dantian destroyed, for the guy to tie the blindfold on his eyes without hesitating. Now completely blindfolded, the young disciple remains standing right before the imposing and scary cliff. He extends his hand, feeling the cold rock, while wondering desperately what he should do to surprise. The boy complains mentally that that task seems just an indirect way of sending him straight to death. He supports his left foot on a small rocky ledge, thinking about how that climbing idea is madness. The young man knows that his bot talent helps a lot, but recognizes that a single wrong step would be his tragic end. Suddenly, his hand begins to emanate a mysterious blue glow upon touching a specific point of the stone wall. The boy continues going up slowly through the steep rocks, concentrating all his attention on each new movement. With his face very close to the wall, he feels a strange vibration and decides to focus even more his sharp senses. He widens his eyes in complete amazement upon realizing that in some mysterious way, he manages to see everything around. Even being totally blindfolded, a shining route in blue tones arises, drawn in his mind, indicating the path. He raises his head confident, feeling the energy guide each one of his actions in the climb. Without any type of fear, the boy extends his arm in direction to one of the luminous points that shines intensely with pure mystical electricity. The boy realizes that the cliff's own relief seems to be teaching his body to climb in an almost forced way. He understands that the secret is not just finding the correct path, but rather adapting himself to the climb's natural rhythm. At each new step that the young man gives, the blue energy intensifies under his feet, dictating the perfect compass of the movement. He notes that a perfect mystical trail goes revealing itself as he advances, showing a very specific purpose. The protagonist finally reaches the mountain top and supports himself on his knees, recovering his breath after the insane test. He removes the blindfold from his eyes, surprised upon noting that his internal energy started to flow in perfect rhythm with the steps. The young man contemplates the beautiful view of the horizon, understanding that climb was in fact an advanced martial training. He touches his belly with amazement upon realizing that his dantian is incredibly heated. After concluding the climb, he realizes that the level of this technique is much superior to the inferior martial arts he studied in his previous life. Suddenly, the master hits the guy's head with a thick book, complaining for him having removed the blindfold without authorization. Grumbling from pain, the boy holds the book and questions the reason of his tutor throwing something so heavy against him. The young man analyzes the cover of the mystical manual and realizes, shocked, that it deals with the official record of the blue cloud steps. The elite master explains with seriousness that that is the movement style that the guy just initiated in practice. The man advises the boy to study the theory in the manual to understand the deepest secrets of that technique. Wai Young stares at the mystical manual, feeling an indescribable and mysterious sensation upon holding that ancient teaching. He remembers that in his previous life, he learned only mediocre low-level martial arts that were good for nothing. The young man remembers with bitterness that at the time he was so incapable that he could barely dominate the basic sword techniques. He gets emotional upon realizing that now he is finally learning one of the most prestigious martial arts in the world. The master stares at him in absolute silence, while the boy begins to let out joyful giggles of pure personal satisfaction. The master surprises the guy upon revealing in a cold way that the teaching represents just a small fraction of the whole. He explains that if the guy becomes an official disciple, he will be able to have access to much more powerful secrets of the sect. The man questions with mockery if he still wants to run away from there, and the boy responds awkwardly that the place is even acceptable. The guy asks if he will be able to do business in the common world if he becomes a disciple, and the tutor confirms, coughing slightly. With shining eyes, the boy asks if he will be able to command a merchant guild, but hears that that would be impossible. The master clarifies that with a proper authorization of the leader, it is possible to act as an official guardian in the secular world. The boy laments a little the response, but hands the orders to the other employee, who thanks for the good service. The guy says goodbye, warning that he already concluded all the tasks and will go away, but is interrupted by the master's call. The superior asks where he thinks he is going if there is still work to do, leaving the guy completely surprised. The elite master explains seriously that his obligations changed, and now he answers for the whole financial sector. Why Young boils with hate internally, thinking about how all the martial fighters managed to be arrogant and clueless. He grinds his teeth, annoyed to see his moment of emotion with the technique totally ruined by more hard work. The boy yells indignant, questioning since when it is allowed to alter an agreement without even warning the interested party. The master ignores the scandal indifferently, while the boy complains, angry, comparing the bosses to common bandits. The young man shouts, calling all of them crazy ponytail monks, making an anger vein pop on the master's forehead. At the same moment, the master delivers a fast and accurate blow on the back of the cheeky guy, who loses his breath right on the spot. The boy makes a hilarious face of pure pain and suffocation after receiving the impact of the violent blow on his back. Fallen on his knees on the earth, the guy moans in pain while hearing the master comment dryly that he is in a hurry to die. With a somber look, the man warns that disobeying the direct orders of a superior generation is an extremely grave fault. The young man trembles with fear on the ground upon hearing the master say coldly for him to go ahead and die if he continues rebellious. A desperate scream for help echoes through the whole mountain under the dark clouds that begin to cover the beautiful blue sky. The heavy rain falls over the grand traditional structures of the sect while the boy's suffering continues. Under the storm, the protagonist runs, protecting his head with his hands. While trying to take shelter from the sudden storm, he runs as fast as he can in direction to the pavilion, seeking to escape that heavy rain that floods the stone courtyard. Already on the side of the storm, he twists his soaked clothes, letting out a tired sigh with that whole situation. He begins to remove the wet tunic to be able to dry himself properly and avoid catching a cold in that cold. Exhibiting a surprisingly defined physique, the guy wonders where that violent storm came from out of nowhere. 2 months pass, and he notes that his body adapts perfectly to the work, thanks to the daily running trainings. He remembers that he thought the task impossible, and complains that his grumpy master could have given a decent explanation. The boy celebrates upon noting that his system's talent store also evolved, accompanying his own growth. With the level up of the mysterious store, the amount of available combat techniques increased in an absurd way. The only bad point of that whole evolution is that now the list of options is too long for him to manage to read everything fast. He smiles animated, imagining which fantastic powers he will be able to unlock in the future, and thinks the progress very fun. Suddenly, the master appears out of nowhere and hits a strong punch on the top of the guy's head, who screams of pain with the scare. The guy complains, yelling, and the master asks back if he wasn't using the blue cloud steps on the route. The master scolds him for leaving footprints, and the guy thinks angry if the man doesn't want him to simply walk through the air. The guy realizes that the blows, in fact, were acupuncture points applied by the master to stimulate his energy. Cheong Su comments that the disciple finally reached the minimum level necessary, leaving the young man quite astonished. Cheonghwa appears smiling and announces that now the guy finally can start his training in the Tao Pavilion. Young asks if his service in the finances ended, but the master warns that he must continue working. Cheonghwa explains that as soon as the weather improves, they will go to the Tao Pavilion, meet the other disciples. The master warns that if he becomes an official member, the other guys of the temple will be his senior brothers. Without another choice, the young man just accepts the order while observing the beautiful and imposing structure of the Wudang sect. Young follows his tutor along the corridor, trying to understand what awaits him in this new phase of his training. The young man questions himself if he will finally have the opportunity to learn the true martial arts of the sect. He remembers with quite frustration of when Cheonghwa brought him dragged as a simple temporary disciple. The guy recalls that his only task, until now, was carrying heavy bags of correspondence up the mountain. Whenever he questioned the reason for doing, only that the master responded smiling that everything had its time. At the time, that response seemed absurd, but the guy realizes that the long-awaited moment finally arrived. He walks, hoping that his new training companions will be friendly and easy to deal with. Suddenly, the protagonist stops, totally shocked with the unbelievable scene that arises before his eyes. Chiangwa just maintains a serene and calm smile on his face while he awaits the reaction of his pupil. Wai-young wonders if he wasn't demanding too much upon coming face to face with three small children staring at him. The boys appear crying because of broken toys, and the guy notes with dread that they are his seniors. Indignant, he whispers, asking if he really will have to call those little children senior brothers. Wai-young shouts, revolted, stating that it is absurd since he reached adulthood a long time ago. He points furious to the children, complaining for having to treat boys so young as his superiors. The master warns that that is common in the martial world, but the young man counters irritated, saying that that is already exaggeration. The young man tries to use the fact of being just a temporary student as an excuse to not act like an official. Chelmwa says that he doesn't need to call them like that for now, and that he should just adapt himself with calm. Next, the master flies far away, leaving the young man desperate and alone with the children in the courtyard. Without knowing what to do, the protagonist remains, stopped with hand extended, staring at the sky without reaction. Suddenly, one of the boys calls him, asking if he is the new junior disciple who just arrived. The little boy positions himself in an imposing way with hands behind, staring at the guy with seriousness. With a look quite cold and authoritative, the child demands directly that the protagonist responds. Wai-young confirms awkwardly and realizes that that arrogant boy must be the leader of the group of children. The boy gives a sermon about respect and good manners, leaving the protagonist with an expression of boredom. The boy introduces himself as Myong Sung, and the young man realizes that he is a boy quite proud. Myong Sung states seriously that the guy seems determined to hinder the order established in the sect. The boy accuses the protagonist of distracting the other disciples with useless toys during the training. Wai-young narrows his eyes, analyzing the situation, while hearing the arrogant chatter of that child. Holding a green leaf, the young man asks with irony if the boy is referring to the grass flute. He notes the bright eyes of Myong Sung and realizes that the boy only was fighting for pure jealousy. The protagonist decides to play a soft song with the grass flute to calm the spirits of the little boy. Upon hearing the first notes, the little Myong Sung is totally paralyzed with the chin trembling. The soft sound of the grass flute echoes through the courtyard, calling the absolute attention of the arrogant little boy. The beautiful melody makes green leaves float through the air, creating a magical atmosphere under the clear sky. Impressed with the young man's musical talent, all the boys begin to applaud with eyes shining. Embarrassed, Myong Sung tries to maintain the pose, saying that as an older brother, he must give the example. Guy suggests that if the toy is used only in the intervals, the others will not get distracted. Wai-young offers the grass flute as a gift to help keep the younger ones under control. The little leader hesitates for a moment, but stretches his arm with care to grab the toy. Myong Sung accepts, blushing, and the other boys whisper that he only was angry because he wanted the toy. Suddenly, an arrogant voice arises, criticizing the vulgar melody, and calls the scene something lamentable. Three older disciples begin to approach, walking in an imposing way in direction to the group. Myong Sung makes a face immediately and asks with quite irritation what they want there. A young guy, big and robust, named Myong, and appears with arms crossed, staring at everyone with disdain. Wai-young tries to focus on the boys' faces, but gets confused with the similarity between these names. Myong orders the boy to have shame and asks if he doesn't feel humiliated before the juniors. Wai-young observes the tired face of the guy and questions himself if he really possesses the same age as them. Myong approaches with heavy steps and asks if he is the merchant who lives selling the flutes. The big guy threatens to cut the guy's wrist, while the young man thinks that he scares anyone just with the face. Myong Jae-young interferes quickly, promising the senior that he will take care of educating the new junior disciple. Myong yells, irritated, questioning the title of junior, and the little admits that he is just a temporary one. Upon knowing about the provisional position, the big guy sketches a sarcastic smile, realizing who it is on the spot. He mocks, saying that his master commented about the secular guy, who tries to enter the internal Wudang sect. A firm step echoes on the stone floor of the courtyard, initiating the climate of extreme tension between the young people of the temple. Mayong and points his finger in a provocative way, questioning if the guy is a complete sluggard for his age. But suddenly Mayong, Sung's wooden sword appears, blocking the bully's hand firmly in the air. The boy positions himself in a protective way before his colleague, staring at the rival with deep dissatisfaction. Mayong, Sung orders dryly for him to stop acting like that, cause Wyong now is his direct junior disciple. With an expression of extreme fury stamped on the face, Mayong, and asks if he wants to resolve that in the fight. The little leader challenges him, asking if he is afraid, while the protagonist just observes everything awkwardly. Wyong observes from afar the childish confrontation, wondering what exactly he is doing there in the courtyard. Mayong Jiang approaches, whispering, and explains that those bullies are students of the rival master Chiang Su. He reveals that the professors of the rival floors don't get along, and the guy feels touched for being defended. Mayong hand orders the boy to get out of the way, because he intends to punish the secular guy for breaking the discipline from there. Mayong Sung counters, saying that he himself will take care of the discipline for being the direct senior of the new temporary student. Another boy of the rival faction enters the middle, waving his wooden sword in a quite threatening way. Mayong Sung unsheathers his wooden sword and warns that he will explain each one of the rules using just his style. Mayong Han smiles at the corner, with fury, anxious to initiate the combat against the little rival in the courtyard. The two advance with speed, delivering wooden sword blows that collide with extreme violence in the air. Mayong Jiang celebrates animatedly, listing all the previous statistics of victories and defeats of that rivalry. The little one cheers joyfully for the friend's victory, while Hwayoung thinks that not even enemies would fight that way. The protagonist analyzes the fast movements and realizes that his fighting vision changed after training martial arts. Unlike his previous life, he now manages to see perfectly the flow of the whole combat in the arena. The young man realizes that both utilize the Blue Cloud Steps style as base for all their movements. Thanks to his previous knowledge, he manages to predict with ease each next attack and the final result. Without any shadow of doubt, the outcome of that intense duel is decided by an extremely powerful blow. Mayong Han is hit with extreme violence and ends up being launched backward, totally without balance in the courtyard. The big guy collapses on his back on the stone floor, defeated, while he tries to recover his breath after the terrible blow. Mayong Sung breathes in a heavy and tired way while pointing his wooden sword straight to the fallen rival. The boy orders the opponent to go away at once, officially decreeing his great victory in that combat. Another boy of the rival faction approaches, finding the winner's words too harsh for a training colleague. The new adversary smiles confidently, challenging the little leader, who is already totally exhausted. He asks if the tired boy would accept teaching a combat lesson to him also right next in the arena. Mayong Sung prepares his combat posture, making a quick movement with his training wooden sword. Close up of his face reveals that the boy is panting and sweating cold from tiredness after the last heavy fight. Even being completely exhausted, he accepts the new challenge, raising his wooden weapon with determination. Wyung observes them, thinking about how those children manage to lead lives so intense, even being so young. The young man realizes that Mayong Sung is about to collapse from exhaustion and admires his tremendous will strength. However, he knows very well that will strength alone will not be enough to save him this time in the arena. The little warrior's fight spirit ends at the moment his sword is thrown far away by the adversary. The rival points the wooden sword right against the face of the defeated boy, sealing the result of the dispute. The adversary celebrates, panting his victory, but Mayong Jiang interrupts him, asking for him to wait for an instant. The little disciple advances, wielding his weapon, and asks politely to receive a combat lesson also. He provokes asking if the opponent intends to flee right after defeating an adversary that was already tired. The rival boy smiles with mockery and tells the little one to stop talking nonsense and advance right to the attack in the courtyard. The two little ones take fast steps, colliding their wooden swords with extreme determination amidst the training. Young watches everything in silence, wondering if that team dispute really works that way. He evaluates that Zhang manages to handle some, but the big problem is the other adversaries. The protagonist thinks that with the exception of the group leaders, the other fighters on his side are just little children. He notes that even having more stamina, the difference of age and strength of just 1 year becomes absolute in the combat. The young man realizes that without a great experienced master to change the course of that dispute, their defeat will be inevitable. The boy collapses totally knocked out on the courtyard floor, confirming the protagonist's worst expectations. Hen approaches with an arrogant look of victory, while the protagonist continues, sitting in a calm way. The big guy raises his head victorious, celebrating the crushing defeat of the whole protagonist's pavilion. He smiles in an evil way, commenting that now he will finally be able to punish the secular guy without any interruption. The guy remembers that in fact the children only entered that ugly fight in the attempt to defend him from the bully. Upon seeing his little seniors crying from sadness, he feels that he would be very guilty if he left things like that. Young surprises the opponent by proposing directly that the bully tries to teach a lesson to him in the courtyard. He approaches, staring at the big guy in the eyes with a serious expression, leaving the rival quite uncomfortable. Internally, the protagonist boils with anger, wondering if he should use a bit of his real secret power to win. The bully proposes arrogantly that if the guy kneels down now, he will let that whole humiliation pass. The protagonist just responds with a swear word directly, demonstrating that he doesn't have the slightest fear of the adversary. Furious, the big guy closes his fists with strength and warns that the guy chose the worst path possible to resolve that. Young mocks his face, pretending to laugh, and asks how someone with an old man's face can talk of drink that way. And roars from pure anger, delivering a violent punch, but the guy manages to dodge with quite agility. The enraged opponent yells, starting for the secular young man with all his physical strength and aggressiveness in the arena. He delivers another powerful punch in the air, but the protagonist slides through the arena floor, escaping the blow with lightness. The boy smiles confidently, thinking that the adversary committed a grave mistake upon thing that he would fight without thinking. He realized that although the level of their strength is higher, his capacity to analyze the movements is much superior. The young man deduces that this occurs for he having accumulated a vast experience observing combats in his previous life. Besides that, the protagonist notes that all the rivals' attacks are based on the sect's basic movement steps. As he dominates perfectly that stepping technique, he manages to predict with ease each next blow of the enemy. The rival gets startled upon seeing the young man counter attack and lets out a moan, surprised, almost losing his composure in the combat. But next, the big guy stops and makes a face of extreme confusion, not understanding what just happened there. He looks at his own unharmed body and realizes that the punch delivered by the protagonist in fact passed scraping. The young man holds his own hand, trembling from pain upon noticing how resistant and hard is that adversary's body. He sweats from nerves and torments internally for having calculated wrong the enormous difference of physical strength between them and the arena. Young dodges another punch, knowing that although his footwork is better, that alone is not enough to win. He blocks another powerful blow, feeling the violent impact shake his whole body amidst that stone arena. He remembers that the boys train energy for years, and that fortunately he manages to dodge, but the situation is still dangerous. The young man knows that if he is hit squarely by one clean punch of that brutal physical strength, it will be the end of the combat. Before this big danger, the protagonist prepares to change tactics, taking an attitude quite unexpected. The two fighters exchange extremely focused and tense glances waiting for the next and decisive movement of the dispute. Young decides to make a big bet and jumps in the air with agility, challenging the rival with all his courage. The adversary responds, delivering an extremely powerful and fast punch straight in direction to the protagonist's face. The rival's fist passes, scraping close to the young man's throat, who performs an incredibly precise dodge in the air. The enemy widens his eyes, confused, thinking that they would exchange true blows instead of such a short dodge. The boy throws himself backward in an exaggerated way, pretending to have been gravely hit by the startled adversary's punch. He closes his eyes, letting out a jet of saliva in the air to feign perfectly a terrible knockout before everyone. The disciples of the rival pavilion observe the sudden fall with scared expressions and sweating cold from nerves. Myong Sung and his colleague widen their eyes in despair upon seeing the friend collapse on the courtyard floor that way. The protagonist falls, hitting his face on the stone floor, and slides in a dramatic way, while the rival observes, confused. He remains stretched on the ground, moaning softly from pain, while the opponent remains static without understanding the sudden fall. The big guy sweats cold from nerves and asks himself, desperate, if he really ended up hitting the guy accidentally in the arena. Suddenly, a scream demands to know what is happening there, making the bully tremble from fear instantly. The two influential masters of the sect arise, walking side by side with extremely serious and imposing expressions. Chiang Su shouts, furious with the disciples, asking what the hell they think they are doing in the courtyard. The big guy stutters from dread, trying to come up with some convincing excuse before his own master's fury. Chiang Su supports his hand in a heavy way over the head of his pupil, who trembles from fear instantly. The young man looks up startled, waiting for the terrible scolding that he will certainly receive from his superior. The master in the dark tunic explains that he ran to the courtyard as soon as he heard the big confusion caused by them. Chiang supports the protagonist, passed out on the ground, while trying to verify the gravity of his injuries. Suddenly, an exaggerated jet of blood splashes from the guy's nose, leaving the experienced master in shock. Trying to ease the situation, Chiang Su clears his throat without grace, saying that was just a children's fight. Chiang reacts furious, hitting the young man's chest to make him breathe, while questioning the rival's comment. He asks if beating someone totally layman and without combat training now became a simple boys' fight. With an extremely intimidating look, the master in the blue tunic demands that the bully apologizes immediately. He yells, ordering for the excuse to be made right now, while the protagonist continues, fallen, holding his nose. Young analyzes the situation, realizing that the rivalry between the two masters of the sect is even worse than he thought. He gets surprised with the drama made by his tutor and deduces that he is just using the situation to press the rival. Chiang Su grinds his teeth with deep anger upon being cornered in that humiliating way before the disciples. Without exit, he touches his pupil's shoulder, ordering the big guy to apologize once for all to end that. Myong swallows his pride and murmurs an apology request, very dry under the victorious look of the protagonist. The master of the rival faction turns his back, irritated, and orders harshly that all his students return. But before they go up the stairs, the protagonist shouts, ordering the group to wait for one more instant. The adversaries stop and look back surprised, while the young man waves in a quite relaxed way. He points to his own bloody nose and asks if they don't intend to hear the opinion of the real victim. Chiang Su turns furious, asking what else the guy wants to demand now that he already received an apology request. Young opens a friendly smile and responds in a meek way that he wishes just something simple to close the dispute. With a classic gesture of money, he asks that the rival pays a reasonable amount for his medical expenses. The rival gets astonished with the audacity of the request for silver coins, while Chiang hides his face of shame. The young man knows very well that charging 2 silver coins for a fake bleeding is an absurd extortion on his part. He reflects that 1 silver coin is equivalent to 1,000 copper coins, but doesn't care to apply that small blow. The guy provokes the rival, insinuating that a great elite master would never be cheap, to the point of refusing the payment. Without wanting to look cheap, the rival master sticks his hand into his tunic in an extremely annoyed way. The boy catches the silver coins in the air, celebrating joyfully the absolute success of his extortion blow. The irritated master asks, "What is the name of the cheeky young man?" and he responds with pride that he is named Muk Wai Young. Chiang Su turns his back and begins to walk in direction to the temple's stairs with heavy and slow steps. He warns somberly that he will keep that name in his memory while moving away, accompanied by his students. Wai Young admires his new coins with joy, but his tutor appears at his side, clearing his throat to call his attention. Chiang will warn, smiling, that he will keep the silver coins in safety, leaving the young man completely horrified. The boy complains, angry, saying he earned the money with his own effort, but the master takes the bag and runs away. While walking, the master praises sarcastically the excellent theatrical performance the guy did on the courtyard floor. He plays, saying that he never saw anyone perform a somersault in the air, throw himself alone on the ground with such perfection. The tutor reveals that he watched the whole confusion since the beginning, and the guy complains, angry for him not having intervened before. Chiamwa counters, questioning if the guy doesn't feel shame for not managing to hit a rival much younger. The guy cleans his ear without the slightest sign of shame, alleging in a relaxed way that he doesn't care even a little. He argues that for being a layman without martial training, it is natural not managing to defeat who trained their whole life. The master turns with his fist closed, warning that for being his senior, he will have to teach some good manners. The young man makes a bored face and murmurs in a lazy way that he has not the slightest interest in respecting fighters. The elite warrior widens his left eye with deep indignation before such insolence of the guy. A violent mystical energy rumble explodes in the center of the courtyard, cracking the whole stone floor around. Chiamwa snaps his fingers, smiling, and warns that the martial world possesses rigid rules that he will have to learn now. The man walks calmly in direction to the startled guy, while the other children observe everything from afar. The master prepares his powerful fist over the fallen guy and advises him to relax his body, to not hurt himself much. Stretched on the cracked ground, the protagonist sweats cold from dread and calls desperately for the master to stop with that. From that day on, a completely new and exhausting routine was added to the young man's daily life. His new duty consisted of training in a very simple way under the constant supervision of Master Chianwa. The hardest part was that he would end up being beaten mercilessly as soon as the entire training session finished. Although the master called it simple acupuncture stimulation, the intensity was 1,000 times worse than before. With the unbearable pain lasting for more than half the day, the young man realizes he has finally reached his physical limit. He lies exhausted on the stone floor and decides that he needs to use the Mystic Scrolls talent shop right now. His intention was to save coins to buy high-level skills, but the master's fists are just too painful. Thanks to his rigorous daily training, the young man notices that several new interesting talents have been unlocked. Remembering that he still has the 2 silver coins he got from the rival master, he prepares to make a purchase. He focuses on finding an affordable skill that can help him endure all that physical suffering immediately. With his eyes wide open and sweating from nervousness, the young man makes his final decision while facing the scroll screen. The 2 shiny silver coins in his hands begin to turn into pure golden energy that envelopes his body. A message confirms that the purchase was completed successfully, and the young man celebrates while feeling the mystic energy in his hands. The blue-robed master appears the next day with a very calm and friendly look to observe his pupils' training. Chianwa asks with a smile if the young man doesn't finally feel that all that hard work is paying off. Wai-young lifts the iron weights, showing off an extremely muscular and defined physique due to the intense workouts. Without showing the slightest excitement, he replies directly that, in fact, Every day has just been pure physical torture. The master laments the young man's cold response, claiming he hoped he would feel joy in seeing his own progress. Ignoring the complaint, the tutor clenches his fist tightly and warns that it is time to start their usual beating routine. He advises the young man not to tense his body, as resisting the impacts will make the pain of the blow twice as bad for him. The master delivers a devastating punch that sends the protagonist flying backward along with his heavy iron dumbbells. The young man lets out a loud groan of pain upon receiving the violent impact of the direct attack on his exposed chest in the arena, but to his own surprise, he cracks a wide smile upon realizing that he managed to withstand the attack without major damage. The purchased talent was called Resistant Physique, proving that the investment of the silver coins was truly worth it. He gets excited, thinking that if a simple 8th class skill is this good, his future plans will be incredible. The young man laughs softly and deduces that he doesn't even need to save up for legendary talents if he can accumulate several cheaper ones. With a mischievous smile, he imagines himself becoming the strongest warrior in the world just with low-level skills. The master watches him, intrigued, with narrowed eyes and asks why his body suddenly became so rigid. Manhwa begins to stretch his arms happily, while the boy kneels, trembling, anticipating the worst for the next few minutes. The master cracks a scary smile and warns that since the young man's body can handle more, he will be able to hit with much more force. The sight of that giant fist coming toward him reminds the boy of a vital rule he had completely forgotten. He realizes in the worst possible way that cheap items always come at a price, and a deafening explosion echoes through the courtyard. Little Jeong peeks fearfully over the stone wall upon hearing that deafening sound of impact in the arena. The little boy asks worriedly if the senior is alive, while Jeong smokes, lying on his back, completely knocked out. The little one suggests that he scream in pain, so the master will feel pity. But the young man grumbles that ogre would never do that for him. The boy offers to help plead for mercy from the master, but the young man begs him not to do that and make the whole situation worse. The boy wishes him a safe trip as he watches the young man walk away toward the Gokjeon Pavilion for another long day of work. Jeong walks exhausted with cold sweat running down his face while he tries to recover from that whole morning beating. He acknowledges that the little boy just wants to be helpful to his direct senior, but admits the situation remains awkward. The young man looks at the sky and murmurs to himself that he needs to find a quick way to escape from that sect of lunatics. Upon arriving at the pavilion, the finance master warns in a dry tone that there is no work to be done today. The young man begs, saying he will do any household chore, just so he doesn't have to go back to the arena and suffer in training. He sweats from nervousness and opens his eyes wide upon realizing that the master shows no sign of compassion for his desperation. The young man clings to the master's lead, crying and begging for help, while the man shouts for him to stop the drama. Suddenly, a disciple appears, knocking on the wooden door and interrupting the humiliating scene by calling the superior's attention. The messenger reports that a large market is opening and that they have requested the armed escort services of their sect. Jeong listens from the floor that about 50 merchant guilds will participate and realizes it is a huge event. He remembers that the merchants in that region are extremely rich and would surely pay very generous amounts. The young man focuses all his attention on the conversation upon hearing that the guild is offering 10 valuable silver coins per person. While the master thinks the merchants are stingy, the protagonist on the floor celebrates, realizing his great golden opportunity. Upon hearing about the payment, the young man revolts on the floor, cursing the merchants for trying to rob the famous Wudang sect. The other disciple shows the silver and suggests buying their salt again, detailing the wholesale prices of the negotiation. Jeong gets up, yelling furiously, and asks if they have all completely lost their minds by accepting that value. The master grabs him by the collar, and the young man apologizes quickly, arguing that the current price being charged is a complete absurdity. Upon being questioned about his knowledge of the past, He suddenly remembers that he actually ended up regressing in time. He analyzes the scenario thoughtfully and remembers that the correct price of the salt he knew should be exactly half that amount. The young man tries to find the reason for such a difference in prices under the curious looks of the other members there in the pavilion. Suddenly, something clicks in his mind, and he realizes that the salt distribution system has not yet undergone changes. He recalls that in the past it was mandatory to possess a special license issued only at the northern border to sell salt. This restriction served as a great government incentive to attract brave merchants to the dangerous borders. With this, the border regions became the hub for salt, from where merchants bought it to resell it throughout the rest of the country. This ancient method of control was called the Gaijung system, but it ended up being abolished by the authorities some time later. He remembers perfectly that this outdated law ended up being replaced at the time by the feared Geelsaik system. Under the new Geelsaik decree, all salt began to be collected by internal organs and sold directly by the government. Although no one knew the real reason for abolishing the previous law, the old merchants suffered the terrible consequences. Many suspected that the change occurred because the merchants were evading taxes and the government was waiting for a chance to act. With the new control, the product became ridiculously easy to obtain, which caused a devastating drop in prices. He realizes that this was how salt came to cost less than half the amount the sect intended to pay in the market. The young man remains thoughtful in the corner of the room, trying to come up with a smart plan to take advantage of this whole situation. He calculates that the new law will come into effect soon and that the sect will suffer colossal losses if it buys the stock now. He realizes that the sellers have insider information to burn the stock and clenches his fist, anticipating a disaster. The protagonist approaches seriously and places his hand firmly on the shoulder of the finance pavilion master. He orders directly not to buy the salt yet, as he refuses to stand idly by and watch the sect be deceived. The master questions him with distrust, asking what a layman would know about rare discounts offered by merchants. Wang returns the question, asking if the master doesn't find it strange that stingy merchants give discounts out of nowhere. The master scoffs, calling the boy paranoid, and says that every merchant is smart and only thinks about his own profit. Wang argues that every drastic discount hides secrets, and thinks that speaking ill of them is the only way to convince the man. With his arms crossed, the pavilion master stares at him fixedly and asks seriously if he will take responsibility for this. With a very confident smile on his face, the boy replies that he certainly accepts responsibility for the consequences. The protagonist already begins to imagine everyone in the sect admiring his brilliance, right after they save the temple's finances. He wanders into his thoughts, making silly puns with his own name while sketching a very mischievous smile. However, his joy ends when the master orders with authority that he prove all his claims before the supreme leader. The young man sweats cold with dread and opens his eyes wide, stuttering, unable to believe who the master just mentioned. He swallows hard in complete silence, realizing the size of the problem he just got himself into at the last minute. The two enter the grand and imposing main pavilion of the Wuding sect, under the watchful eye of those waiting at the table. There is the legendary Chiang, known as the Taiji Sword Emperor and recognized as one of the world's greatest heroes. The master notices Wang's cheeky manner and thinks that he usually acts loose, just because he doesn't know the danger. He is amused, wanting to see if the cheeky young man will maintain the same audacity when looking directly into the eyes of the greatest authority there. The sect leader analyzes him very calmly and remembers that this is the young man that the legendary Qianghua had mentioned before. Although he sees nothing special about the young man at first glance, he recognizes that Qianghua has an excellent nose for talent. He breaks the silence, ordering the pavilion master to explain the reason why they should not buy salt from the Yiqing market. The finance master trembles with nervousness and tries to dodge, stuttering that opinion does not actually belong to him. The sect leader stares at him coldly, reminding him that as the director of that pavilion, he is responsible for all the reports there. He demands immediate explanations, warning severely that the master will be severely punished if he does not have concrete proof. Desperate, the master tries to justify himself while realizing in despair that the conversation has taken the worst possible turn for him. The protagonist lets out a heavy sigh, lowering his head upon noticing his superior's cowardice before the supreme leader. Mukwayoung takes a firm step forward and warns with complete calm that he doesn't even officially belong to that pavilion. The sect leader looks at him curiously and retorts, saying that if the young man is standing in that room, he is definitely part of that sector. The young man looks into the authorities' eyes and answers very sincerely that if it were up to him, he would never have set foot in that place. The legendary leader of Wudong fixes his sharp eagle eyes on the boy in absolute silence to analyze such audacity. The supreme leader decides to ignore the frightened finance master and resolves to ask his question, docked directly to the secular youth. He explains that an opportunity to buy Shanxi salt at a discount is very rare, and that others will soon act. The elderly man warns that time is passing quickly and demands to know the real reason. He is trying to stop this deal from moving forward. Huayang answers calmly, saying that time is actually on their side and guarantees that he has everything under his control. The young man states with a mischievous smile that the large merchant guilds of Huzhou won't even try to buy this salt. The sect's supreme leader narrows his eyes very seriously and asks directly where the proof for that is. Huayang reveals with an astute look that the heir of the merchant king himself is training right there in the temple courtyard. He cites the renowned Yeo family of Huzhou, and the leader immediately orders his subordinate to bring the young man into the room. The finance master runs in despair to carry out the order, while the protagonist waits calmly with his arms crossed. A short time later, the young heir of the great family enters the main room, trembling with nervousness before the superiors. The shy boy makes a respectful bow and introduces himself formally by the name of Yeo Hongyang before the authorities. The supreme leader greets him calmly and reveals that he called him just to ask questions about the Yiqing market. He asks if it is true that the wealthy merchants of Huzhou will not participate in the market, and the young heir confirms it. The elderly man questions the reason for staying out of such a big event, and the boy says he will need to check with his parents. In any case, he guarantees that none of the 15 great factions in his region have plans to attend the market. The experienced sect leader closes his eyes thoughtfully, digesting all that surprising last-minute information. The elderly man thanks him for the help and tells the young disciple to return to training, while the protagonist lets out a disguised whistle. Huayang observes the scene and reflects that he finally manages to understand the reason for his master trying to protect him in the past. He remembers when the master tried to stop his blunders and realizes that Wudong's finances are in the same bad situation. He admits that because of his past life, he would prefer to ignore the temple's problems, but he simply cannot do that. The young man lets out a slight smile, thinking it will be cowardly of him to let his new friends go to total ruin. He compares the terrible mistake of buying Shanxi salt to an innocent child, walking toward the well without seeing the danger. The supreme leader stares at him fixedly, with a penetrating gaze, and demands to know how he managed to discover all these things. With a mysterious smile, the young man answers casually that it is all just a big trade secret of his. He states that the salt business will fail anyway, and suggests that the sect wait longer to make the purchase. The supreme leader decides to accept the unusual advice and announces firmly that he will cancel the early purchase of the stock. The finance master accepts the order with his head down, while the elderly man tells the protagonist to personally buy the salt later. The young man is startled and tries to argue, saying that his idea was not to buy the product at all in the current situation. The elderly man touches his subordinate's shoulder authoritatively and warns that that order was given directly to Mukwayoung. The protagonist lets out an expression of extreme surprise and confusion upon realizing that he just received a big task from him. The supreme leader approaches imposingly toward that secular young man who remains static without being able to react in the room. The elderly man orders harshly that he take the finance master along and ensure they bring the salt back to the temple. He warns that since the boy showed such certainty, he will be severely punished personally if the mission fails in the arena. The young man revolts, yelling with his arms raised that sudden and absurd punishment is a tremendous injustice to him. He complains indignantly, saying that negotiating a lower price with the smart Shanxi merchants is almost impossible. The elderly man explains with a serene look that the real reason for negotiating the salt goes far beyond just covering the temple's accounts. He emphasizes that Wudong's main objective is to ensure the supply of salt and maintain the well-being of the people of his region. He concludes by saying that because of the young man, they lost the chance for discount and demands that the boy pay for the difference there. The finance master provokes the young man from behind, suggesting that perhaps he is just terrible at carrying out real negotiations. Wuyong gets irritated, yelling that he gave just a wise piece of advice, and now they want to make him work for free like a common slave. He brags, saying with his hands on his waist that he is an elite negotiator and that he never works for free without receiving payment. The supreme leader scratches his forehead thoughtfully for a few moments and agrees to offer an appropriate reward for the service. The elderly man proposes that if he manages to buy the salt cheaper than the common market price, he will receive 1% of the savings. The young man begins to calculate the accounts mentally, making rapid imaginary abacus movements in the midst of his thoughts. With his eyes shining with pure greed, the boy demands 10%, but the elderly man retorts coldly, offering 3%. The young man counters, asking for 8%, but the elderly man closes the deal with 5%, claiming it to be his final proposal. The boy cracks a smile from ear to ear and accepts the proposal of a 5% commission with extreme excitement in the room. To avoid unpleasant surprises later, they make it clear and registered on the table with the real market values for salt are. Wuyong clenches his fist tightly, thinking and laughing that small profit will be insignificant compared to what he plans to profit. The boy runs excitedly toward the exit of the room, pointing his finger at the supreme leader and telling him to keep his word. The young man walks out, slamming the wooden door with extreme violence, and leaves the two superiors watching him in complete silence. The finance master asks with concern if the leader really is sure about trusting that important mission to him. He wonders, intrigued, how the supreme leader already knew beforehand that the secular young man was so passionate about coins. The elderly man just closes his eyes with a slight smile on the corner of his mouth, demonstrating his deep wisdom about people. He explains that a man who prides himself on being a merchant would never waste a great opportunity to truly profit. The protagonist walks hurriedly through the temple courtyard and spots his friend, Ozu, talking to other disciples on the terrace. He shouts, calling his friend aloud, and the boy stops blowing his green leaf, turning around surprised by that interruption. Osu greets him and asks, surprised for what reason he is not fulfilling his financial obligations at the main pavilion. Still catching his breath, the boy asks hurriedly if any of them have contacts with the merchants in the Sanzhu region. Osu thinks the question is strange and comments that if they wanted to train, they would go to temples much closer to their lands. The other two secular disciples support what was said, nodding their heads in a very agreeable and thoughtful manner. Wuyong says he already expected that answer, and the friend asks, intrigued, what is really happening at the pavilion. The protagonist explains seriously that Sanzhu merchants are coming to sell salt in the regional market this time. Osu sees no problem in that and says that it is super common to see this type of salt trade happening around the area. The protagonist clenches his fist with considerable firmness while preparing to reveal the terrible truth behind it. He states harshly and directly that this whole salt business is nothing but a big scam planned against the temple. Ozu opens his eyes wide and becomes completely paralyzed with shock upon hearing that scary revelation from his training colleague. One of the young men grinds his teeth with pure indignation upon realizing that they are trying to deceive the members of the famous sect. He gets enraged, yelling about the audacity of coming to exploit the sect using salt, which is such a vital item for survival. He lowers his head with fury and murmurs angrily that they made the worst mistake by trying to mess with territory right away. The students shout furiously, raising their fists in the air, promising to crush all the cheaters from Sanzio without any mercy. The protagonist smiles with his arms crossed, commenting that it is extremely common to see merchants trying to deceive each other. He explains that in the business world the basic rule is that the one deceived is considered the only fool in that entire transaction. However, he highlights that the conversation changes when the victims of the scam are the people who live in his own territory. The young man says that although they seem cold on the outside, local merchants hold a genuine and warm love for their homeland. He guarantees that when foreigners try to exploit the region, the first to rise in defense are the shopkeepers themselves. The boy thinks and laughs that this happens only to protect their own finances, but he decides not to mention that detail. Osu stares at him, intrigued, and asks how exactly these foreign scammers plan to deceive the sect with the sale of salt. The friend says that the people are not stupid to accept it quietly, and the protagonist begins to give his answer by taking a step forward. Suddenly, a gentle voice arises, calling the protagonist's name in surprise, and causes both of them to startle in the courtyard. The young-haired Yeo Hongyoung approaches very timidly, scratching his cheek with embarrassment before the young men. He asks very politely and kindly if he could have a private conversation of a few minutes with the protagonist. The two decide to walk side by side around the temple as the atmosphere of mystery increases under the sect's blue sky. Yeo Hongyoung stops walking and asks the young man directly how he managed to discover that great business secret. Young fakes an expression of complete doubt, tilting his head to the side, and asks what subject the hair is referring to. The boy stares at his colleague's back and asks how he knew that the famous Kaesong control law would be abolished by the government. Yeo Hongyoung assumes a cold and serious look that contrasts completely with his usual timidity from before in front everyone. The protagonist notices the change in his look and concludes that that weak and harmless pose was just a planned act. He deduces that the boy was faking weakness to hide his status as a rich heir and avoid attracting unnecessary problems there. Hongyoung places his hand on his chin and admits sincerely that he did not expect the secular young man to know so much about trade. The heir stares at the young man seriously, commenting that even the great authorities in Beijing are unaware of this new law. He suggests that the protagonist has a very influential godfather behind him and asks to be introduced to this mysterious person. The protagonist extends his index finger, smiling at the corner, and warns casually that he has no outside help. He compliments by stating that the main weapon of every good merchant is not his sword, but keeping his secrets. Yeo Hongyoung stares at him with an extremely attentive look and asks if he should consider that answer as definitive. Suddenly, the young heir lets out a loud and fun laugh that instantly breaks all the tension in the environment. He wipes away his tears, laughing, and says that he heard exactly these same words from his father until his ears got tired. The protagonist smiles, thinking that in fact he learned a lot from the merchant king, even before his temporal regression. The young man suggests that, as both are merchants, they should help each other, but the heir refuses the request shortly and directly. The protagonist asks, startled, the reason, and the heir explains that the agreement between the great leaders has already been signed. The agreement guarantees that the Huzhou merchants will ignore all the profit obtained from the salt trade this time. The protagonist laments the situation upon realizing that there much he can do if that agreement is really real. Yeo Hongyoung is surprised and praises the ease with which the protagonist manages to understand the whole situation. He explains that the logic of the agreement is obvious. since local merchants always charge the equivalent of what they offer. The protagonist narrows his look while he begins to unravel the hidden secrets behind this mysterious pact. The hearer is completely shocked to hear the young man suggest that they tolerate the smuggling of local merchants. Desperate, he holds his head and asks, startled, how far the young man's knowledge about these secrets goes. He offers 10,000 silver coins for the secret, and the young man hesitates to reveal the whole truth about his regression. Faking a cough, the young man changes the subject, remembering that a merchant's greatest weapon is keeping their secrets. The hearer praises his firm character, and the young man asks if the Huzhou merchants will really just watch. The hearer confirms and ponders that in trade the gain of one side always represents the inevitable loss of the other. The protagonist reveals desperately that the Wuding leader told him to buy the cheaper salt under penalty of punishment. The heir begins to laugh aloud upon finally understanding all the confusion the young man caused in the meeting room. The young man admits he irritated the supreme leader, but managed to secure a good commission on the price difference. The heir promises secrecy and asks what the plan is while the young man prepares to reveal his strategy. The protagonist asks him to get closer and begins to whisper the crucial details of his plan into his ear. He reacts surprised and tense upon hearing the audacious details of the strategy the young man plans to put into practice. The protagonist spots the detestable Segong Haiyan approaching and wonders why he appeared just now. The bald man scoffs, saying he should also participate in that secret conversation, and calls the young man by his name. The bully demands to know what they are planning and warns that he will ask the question politely only once. Irritated, the protagonist responds harshly, stating that that matter has nothing to do with him. The bald man says that his pavilion will provide the escort for the festival and therefore demands that they start talking immediately. He threatens to spread suspicious rumors through the council if they refuse to reveal the details of the plan now. The young man realizes that the threat is childish, but knows that the rumor would put him in the spotlight, messing everything up. Yeo Hongyang intervenes coldly, commenting that in fact the matter continues not to be the bald man's business. An imposing presence settles in the place. At the moment, the heir decides to take a step forward in the courtyard. The heir warns that the deal involves the merchant king, and that their pavilion has no right to interfere. He stares at the bald big guy with an extremely intimidating look, making the environment even more tense. He asks darkly if his pavilion has the courage to belittle the powerful and influential Yeo family. The bald bully sweats cold with dread upon noticing the scary aura that the heir had been hiding until now. The bald man grinds his teeth irritably, trying to keep his pose, but realizes he has been completely cornered there. With no way out, the big guy decides to turn around and leaves, accompanied by his two cowardly temple henchmen. John Ozu runs over worried, asking what happened, and the heir says, smiling, that he kicked the nosy guy out of there. He guarantees in a friendly way that he put enough pressure so that the bullies will stop bothering them for a while. The protagonist observes that sudden change of personality and thinks the heir's attitude is very bizarre. Osu interrupts the protagonist's thoughts and asks directly what his true business plan is. The four gather in a tight circle in the courtyard to listen attentively to the confidential details of the plan. The heir supports the idea with a friendly smile, stating that the audacious plan is really worth trying. The other companions agree enthusiastically, commenting that that whole strategy seems incredibly fun. The protagonist cracks an evil smile and promises that things will be even more fun than they imagine. The movement is intense and noisy in the streets of the large village, where people walk under the sunny sky. The companion complains quite a bit about the city's deafening noise, while the protagonist walks calm and happy. Covering his ears tightly, the man asks irritably where the exact location of that famous salt market is. The young man responds with a calm smile, explaining that markets of this type usually stay right in the heart of the city. The master, disguised as a butler, loves to get out of the office, but the young man reminds him of his true identity in the sect. The master asks to enjoy the city view, but soon suspects the peculiar expression on the boy's face. With an enigmatic smile, the protagonist asks the master back what he thinks that expression means. He concludes by stating that that trade look proves that salt merchants command that entire region. An unknown man who was passing by stares at the two travelers with an extremely attentive and curious look. The master introduces himself as Cheong. Su and the merchant Kangshan of Shaanxi greets them, celebrating Wudong's presence there. The man from Shaanxi notes that the Wudong disciples he asked for before have arrived. But there is a catch. With an astute look, the merchant asks the master what brings him personally to that market. Cheong, Su replies that he came to buy the salt in the physical market, even after refusing the future contract. The smart merchant smiles and asks what he can do now that they have decided to make the purchase. The man crosses his arms before them and warns firmly that he will not reduce the price by a single coin. He compliments by saying ironically that in fact, they will have to pay a much more expensive price now. The Wudong finance master remains silent while trying to control his anger in the market. Suddenly, the protagonist interferes, claiming that even so they are still going to buy the cheap salt. The Shaanxi merchant narrows his eyes and asks what the young man means by that statement. The boy warns seriously that no merchant in the world usually gives information for free to rivals. The protagonist explains that there is always some trap, leaving the merchant quite confused. He cracks a mean smile and asks if the old salt control method is about to end. The Wudong master panics and shouts, asking what the young man is talking about there in the market. He grabs the boy by the collar, shouting that the end of this law will make the price of salt drop by half. The protagonist just praises the master's quick reasoning upon noticing that the merchant tried to deceive them. The master turns furiously toward the scammer, but the Shaanxi vendor begs him to wait. The Shaanxi merchant tries to justify himself, claiming that the abolition of the law is just a rumor from Beijing. He says that nothing has been decided, and that as long as the old system remains active, he did not charge extra. The finance master looks startled backward at the moment the protagonist agrees with the man. The boy explains calmly that since the law is still active, the merchant just sold it for the official price. Even so, the Wudong master complains, saying that the scammer should have given a warning about the risk. The young man warns that spreading rumors would bring imperial problems, and that not even Wudong would escape punishment. He says that the merchant's duty is to sell at the best price, and the master just murmurs in anger. The protagonist asks if in fact there is nothing more to be done, and the merchant confirms with his head. The boy says goodbye coldly and calls the finance master to leave there immediately. The master follows him furiously, demanding to know what he was thinking since the new law could ruin the finances. He yells, holding his chest, and questions why the young man didn't reveal that secret before. The boy replies that the master was busy being friendly and giving everything away on a silver platter to the rival. He explains that the master will be remembered as a loyal customer while he will dictate the rules of the deal. The Shaanxi scammer thinks that, when it comes time to negotiate, he will have to deal directly with the young man. The master asks if the boy was called there instead of being sent to the dangerous Dongbai region. The young man spits out his food in shock at the moment the master delivers a punch right on the top of his head. The master drinks his tea calmly and comments that the boy really has the gift of making one want to hit him. The young man eats freely and hears from the master that he is nothing but a small threat that attacks where it hurts most. The master asks what the next step is, and the young man warns that they must wait out the 4 days of the market. Questioned about what they will do in this time, the boy answers that he intends only to walk around the fair. The two look back suddenly with quite surprised expressions upon spotting something on the street. The protagonist points to a candy stand very happily, calling his tutor. The boy cracks a huge smile and celebrates, raising his fist as if he were about to come up with a new plan. The finance master closes his eyes and takes a deep breath, trying to contain his impatience with the boy. He pulls the sleeves of his robe, revealing that he is ready to give another painful lecture to the boy. A loud noise echoes through the busy market right after the master's inevitably aggressive reaction. The owner of a large luxury fabric store welcomes them with a happy smile and open arms. The vendor shows off the beautiful silk pieces, guaranteeing that his entire stock is of the highest quality. The protagonist extends his hand to feel the soft texture of that beautiful green fabric on the table. He stretches the piece of silk with both hands and praises the excellent quality of that shiny cloth. The young man asks if they can look more, and the vendor guarantees that no other store compares to his. The finance master accompanies him, maintaining a suspicious look and arms crossed the entire time. The master complains about walking around the fair, but the young man asks if he didn't notice something strange around there. The master turns with an intrigued expression and asks directly what the young man just noticed. The protagonist shows an extremely astute smile as he begins to explain the truth behind that situation. He recalls that the market commissioner is the official responsible for managing everything very rigidly. All products must pass first through his certification, which classifies them into low, medium, or high quality. Based on this assessment, the commissioner defines what the specific sales locations will be for each merchant. He explains that if the official accepted bribes, he would give a high grade to bad products. But here it is different. The young man analyzes a sword on the table and notes that the common market corruption seems not to be occurring in that place. He praises the commissioner's sharp eye, who classifies everything with rigor without selling himself for bags of gold coins. The boy takes a beautiful sheathed sword firmly to inspect every small detail of its structure. The young man asks the master to buy the sword, and the superior complains, saying that it is a very expensive weapon. The protagonist argues that it is just an investment for the negotiation, and the master begins to look for his money. With no other choice, the finance master throws some valuable silver plates directly into the young man's hand. The protagonist walks along, whistling with happiness with his new weapon, under the extremely irritated look of the master. He turns around happily and says he wants to ask a very intriguing question to the Wudang finance master. He asks if the master agrees that the commissioner is honest and capable, and the superior nods his head. The boy points to the tables and explains that the store where he bought the weapon mixed bad items with others very good ones. The master gets confused, wondering why the commissioner put such a mediocre store in a noble spot. The protagonist sketches an extremely astute smile upon noticing that the master began to understand the line of reasoning. He reveals that the main clue to this whole riddle lies precisely in the identity of the creator of that sword. The finance master inspects the weapon, intrigued, and wonders who would be the blacksmith responsible for that work. He narrows his eyes, analyzing in detail every engraving on the blade's metal to unravel the great mystery. The master reads the name engraved on the weapon's handle and whispers, confused, wondering if it really is Yi Wai Zhang. The young man explains that he is a very famous blacksmith in Beijing, but highlights that there is something much more intriguing in this. With an astute smile, the boy reveals, pointing down, that the hometown of this great blacksmith is Yiqing. The master asks, surprised, if the commissioner is secretly favoring the merchants from that same region. The superior comments that if this is true, the official does not seem to be as honest as they thought before. The protagonist explains that that beautiful sword by Yi Wei Zhang will be the perfect gift to soften the official. The boy laughs, saying they will win the commissioner's favor, but the master complains for him suggesting a bribe. The finance master lets out a long sigh of discouragement upon realizing that he will have to follow the boy's plan. They finally arrive before an imposing and grand traditional multi-story pavilion at the fair. An employee welcomes them with great elegance, serving teas and fine sweets at an exquisite wooden table. The market commissioner opens his eyes wide and becomes totally radiant upon recognizing the blacksmith's signature. The official comments on the high value of the weapon, and the master says politely that it is just a proof of sincerity. The protagonist takes the reins of the conversation very decisively and begins to deal with the price of salt. The official reveals calmly that he was already aware of the new change in the government's salt laws. He tries to reassure them with a slight smile, promising to keep all local brokers well controlled. He states with pride that, since the brokers are from Yicheng, they would never allow losses for Wuding. The protagonist cracks an extremely devilish smile upon noticing that the official fell perfectly into his game. He ponders the vital role of brokers, who serve as mediators in the fair's commercial transactions. If these intermediaries decided to make things difficult, the prices and measures would be totally altered. He analyzes that bribes would be useless now that the commissioner himself has assumed a rigid posture in the negotiation. Suddenly, a sudden sound of knocking on the wooden door calls the immediate attention of the young man in the tea room. The commissioner opens the door, and a messenger reports fearfully that there is an enraged merchant causing a riot. The official asks to be excused very politely and leaves hurriedly to check the reason for that confusion out there. The sliding door is closed softly, leaving the two Wuding members totally alone in the luxurious room. The finance master crosses his arms with boredom, while his pupil remains relaxed, whistling happily. The superior reprimands him in a whisper and asks if he hadn't warned him to avoid talking about the old system. The young man responds nonchalantly that the restriction served only to avoid talking about the subject in public. He takes a big bite of a traditional sweet and continues explaining his logical line of reasoning to the master. The boy points his index finger, stating with enthusiasm that there are no problems if they touch on the subject lightly. He ponders about the secular disciples who work in trade and how they serve as a great asset to Wuding. He whispers that this problem affects the local interest, and that it was enough to give a small tip for everyone to act together. The master pours more tea into the cup, admitting he did not expect such a fast and coordinated reaction from the brokers. The protagonist laments, saying that if he had known that, he would have spent the bribe money on a much better meal. The Wudong finance master makes a face and stares at the young man very seriously upon hearing that comment. The master gets up, ordering them to leave, because he realizes that things are not going to go totally the young man's way. They walk out through the stone courtyard while the young man runs ahead very nonchalantly and happily. The protagonist asks the reason for that sudden exit, and the master just tells him to look toward the staircase. The boy places his hand on his forehead to protect his eyes from the sun. While he tries to see what is happening there, he narrows his eyes with extreme attention upon noticing a very well-known face standing out in the crowd. He sighs tiredly upon realizing that persistent and annoying headache decided to appear right there at the fair. The finance master observes the confusion and asks if those noisy people belong to some evil sect. The young man explains that despite their rude appearance, they belong to a just sect, and the master asks how he knows. The protagonist smiles at the corner of his mouth, responding simply that he just spotted a very familiar face. He sees the detestable Sagong Haiyan standing next to the merchant and realizes that the rival really came to ruin his plans. He remembers that the bald man had left the sect right after the humiliating confrontation he had against Yeo Hong Yang in the courtyard. He ponders that the bald man would never be able to remain in the temple after being publicly humiliated before the hare. But of all possible people, he wonders for what fair reason the bald man ended up becoming the guard for the rivals. The Shanxi merchant shouts with extreme anger, ordering the other people to know the exact moment to stop. He complains aloud, saying that absurd restriction is almost the same as prohibiting all of them from carrying out business. The market commissioner stares at him with tranquility and asks what his motive would be for trying to interfere in business. The commissioner demands proof and asks if he is ready to bear the consequences of accusing a law enforcement official. The Shanxi merchant grinds his teeth with anger and states in the heat of the moment that he already understood the situation perfectly. He warns proudly that the Shanxi merchants possess influential connections and that they will not leave at a loss in any way. The protagonist sketches a small smile, at the corner of his mouth upon noticing the perfect breach he needed to act. The boy takes a step forward, coming out of the shadows, and shouts, telling the enraged merchant to wait another moment. He adopts an imposing pose and questions if local merchants wouldn't end up being seriously harmed by this. With a sarcastic smile, he suggests directly that the merchant should stay very close to the guards there. The man recognizes him right away as the Wudang disciple and accuses him furiously of being the only one to blame for all that intrigue. The boy responds with total tranquility, claiming nonchalantly that he has no relation to the price of salt. He states that he is there only as a merchant and questions the reason for using Beijing rumors to prejudice the region. The Shanxi merchant boils with anger and silence upon being exposed so clearly and directly in front of everyone. Seigong Haiyan rests his hand firmly on his master's shoulder, asking for calm and warning him not to fall for the young man's talk. The bald man states harshly that the merchants have their own rules, and that the government should not get involved. The bald man encourages him to keep calm, reminding him confidently that he was hired precisely to resolve this. He slowly withdraws his hand from the Shanxi merchant's shoulder, demonstrating that he is ready to start combat. With a look of superiority, the big bald guy positions himself before the protagonist and proposes a different method. He suggests resolving that whole great trade dispute by means of a traditional proxy war at the fair. The protagonist cracks a challenging smile and accepts on the spot the bizarre proposal to start the duel before the witnesses. The finance master stares at him worried, while the young man demonstrates absurd confidence in the success of his strategy. The finance master remains totally intrigued by the term without understanding, in fact, the meaning of that dispute. The narration explains that this proxy war is a market method used when the sides of the dispute are not clear. Basically, instead of wasting time arguing about who is right, the merchants decide to resolve everything by brute force. But the main question that remains in the air is what exactly the word force means in the cruel world of business. As every good and experienced merchant already knows very well, the correct answer to this question is simply money. Whoever has more money manages to hire the best guards, which makes this type of duel perfect for the rich. However, the current reality of the protagonist is quite sad, since he does not have even one coin saved in his pocket. The young man looks out of the corner of his eye, suspicious, strongly suspecting that the opponents knew of his lack of funds. The boy deduces that they proposed the duel for knowing that he could never use the official Wudang force to fight. The finance master averts his look thoughtfully and resolves to give an extremely important warning to his pupil. With a very harsh countenance, the master warns dryly for the boy to forget any physical help from his part. The finance master turns to the Shanxi merchant and warns dryly that that rule also applies to him. He clarifies that since the Wudang sect does not get involved in secular affairs, no one there will be able to use official guards. The merchant smiles, agreeing that it would be an absurdity to use the noble warriors of the great sect in such a silly fight. He reveals that he already brought his own security, and the bald bully begins to crack his knuckles intimidatingly. Worried, the commissioner asks the young man what he intends to do and offers to try to gain some time. The protagonist thanks him for the kindness, but refuses the offer, stating firmly that a man must keep his word. He walks imposingly, saying that since he came there as a merchant, he must face the rivals like a real one. The bald man cracks a perverse smile, celebrating that he finally will have the perfect chance to beat the young man in the arena. The protagonist just responds with mockery nonchalantly, wishing good luck to the confident opponent. He makes a provocation gesture with his index finger, challenging the big bald guy to give his best fight blow. The two fighters position themselves face to face on the stone courtyard under the watchful eyes of all the witnesses. Suddenly, the bald man hears a voice behind his back, calling by the title of young leader, and turns around, intrigued, to look. The bald opponent is surprised to notice that important leadership has just arrived at the location of that confrontation. He recognizes the bearded newcomer as the powerful pavilion leader called officially Hong Mun Hak. The bearded master offers to fight in his place, claiming that no one would dare to oppose his extraordinary strength. With mockery, the bald man refuses the help, claiming that the opponent is too weak and does not deserve the attention of a strong warrior. The young man approaches smiling and comments in an provocative tone that for a moment he thought they would change fighters. He provokes, asking if the bald man was afraid to fight, and the rival responds furiously that he would never lose this chance. The commissioner alerts him that the opponent is the young leader of a large sect, and that he is not a common street fighter. The boy tells him not to worry, stating smiling that defeating that arrogant bald man will be an easy task. The commissioner just lets out a long sigh, defeated, upon realizing that it is totally impossible to convince the boy. The commissioner raises his hand to call everyone's attention and prepares to announce the terms of that dispute. He decrees aloud that the loser of the fight will have to accept the conditions demanded by the winner without question. If the bald man wins the dispute, the Shanxi merchants will be able to do business freely without needing intermediaries. On the other hand, if young Wang wins, the Shanxi merchants will have to follow all local rules imposed. Seeing no objection from both sides, the official raises his hand, signaling that the dispute will finally begin. The commissioner gives the start signal, and the young man charges toward the opponent at an absurdly impressive speed. The boy runs, smiling confidently, thinking that in the last fight he only took a beating because he was caught completely by surprise. The young man delivers the first punch with full force, but the bald man draws a gigantic iron sword to block the attack. The protagonist opens his eyes wide in complete astonishment to see the sharp blade of that sword right before his face. The bald rival cracks an extremely perverse smile upon noticing that he managed to shock the opponent with his secret weapon. The bully spins his huge iron sword, cutting the wind while the young man jumps backward, trying to escape the blow. The protagonist yells indignantly, asking where that sword came from and accusing the opponent of cheating in the dispute. The bald man retorts, yelling that no one prohibited the use of weapons, and guarantees with arrogance that that was always his sword. He attacks, delivering quick blows, and warns, smiling, that he will use only the dull part of the blade, so as not to kill him in the arena. He scoffs, telling the boy to use a sword as well in case he feels unfairly treated for not possessing any weapon to fight. Wang grinds his teeth furiously, wondering what kind of nonsensical logic is this that the opponent is using there. The young man dodges the violent lunges and laments desperately because he never even held a real sword. The brutal attacks break the stone floor, raising a lot of dust while the master and the commissioner observe from afar. The Shanxi merchant celebrates, laughing aloud, and encourages the bald bully to break some of the protagonist's bones soon. The commissioner asks, worried, if they shouldn't stop the duel, but the Wudong master responds that it is too late. The finance master explains that if they interrupt now, the Wudong sect will automatically assume the defeat in the dispute. The two observe the tense confrontation in complete silence, while the dust continues to rise violently in the arena. The finance master emphasizes with crossed arms that the courageous young man is also officially a Wudong sect disciple. The bald man raises his sword with both hands and roars, stating that that silly game will not end so soon. The big guy delivers a devastating blow, opening a huge crack in the ground, while the boy dodges with agility. Wang falls to his knees on the ground, recovering his breath and sweating cold from tiredness after dodging that insane attack. The bald man rests the blade on his shoulders and mocks, asking if running away all the time was the only useful thing he learned. He lets out a loud and mocking laugh, calling the protagonist an insignificant rat who is only good for dodging. Wang stands up, adjusting his robe, and asks with a confused look what the big guy is talking about there. Wang mocks, saying he has been training for less than a year and that the rival should be ashamed for not being able to hit him. He continues the provocation, stating that the level of the rival sect is quite low if that bald man is their young leader. Despite speaking with a lot of poise, the protagonist admits in thought that he was in a quite complicated situation. He remembers that before he couldn't even hit the opponent, and that just dodging wouldn't bring victory now. The boy opens an extremely confident and focused look upon noticing that things now are completely different. On the other side, the bald opponent grinds his teeth with so much fury that he almost breaks his own teeth from so much anger. The bearded master notices the loss of control of his hair and shouts, desperate, for him to control his temper. Ignoring the allies' warning, the brute advances at absurd speed, delivering a powerful blow with his arm. He attacks, yelling for the boy to die, while delivering a devastating lunge with his gigantic iron blade. The bald brute is surprised and begins to sweat cold upon noticing that something totally unexpected happened there. Wei Young prepares a powerful counterattack, thinking that now he possesses a secret advantage to win this combat. The young man remembers the special technique of the resistant physique that he bought previously for only 2 silver coins. The protagonist uses his own strengthened arm to block the impact of the huge sword and surprise the opponent. The bald man is completely shocked and without reaction to see his strongest attack being stopped with such ease like that. The witnesses in the arena open their eyes wide in total astonishment upon witnessing the impressive turn of events in the clash. The brute is thrown far away and falls on his back on the ground, completely defeated before all those present. The boy celebrates mentally, realizing that now he manages to defeat that proud rival without suffering a single scratch. He cleans his clothes with tranquility and asks the official they should continue with that dispute at the fair. The commissioner raises Wei Young's arm very high and declares aloud that he is the great winner of that dispute. The official warns that the rival merchants must accept the defeat and stop trying to kick out the local vendors. A few days pass after the outcome of that great confusion, and calm finally returns to the local temple. The young man walks next to his superior while they talk about the great success they had in the salt business. The Wuding sect's supreme leader stares at the two with admiration and comments that the result achieved was unbelievable. He praises the young man's cleverness upon revealing that they saved 300 silver coins with that negotiation. The boy smiles, satisfied, for knowing that the rivals were forced to sell cheap for not being able to take the load. With this beautiful business strategy, the group achieved a gigantic discount that saved that region's finances. The leader hands over the promised commission of 15 silver coins, and the protagonist praises the sect's honesty. The boy kisses the money bag with happiness, while the supreme leader comments that there is something even more surprising. He emphasizes that defeating the young leader of a rival sect with so little training time is a feat worthy of pride. The leader reveals that he intends to grant an unprecedented privilege to the boy, leaving the other superior quite surprised. The supreme leader declares firmly that from that day on the young man will be promoted to an eternal disciple of the sect. He explains that it had been almost 50 years since a secular disciple reached that prestigious position. The great leader praises the boy's performance, stating that he proved his worth and his great talent to everyone. The master tells the young man to be proud of being part of Wuding, but the boy just remains in absolute silence. The young man asks if he can make a special request, and the supreme leader agrees to grant any wish of his. The boy places his right hand over his chest. With respect at the moment, he prepares to reveal his wish. He asks calmly to be expelled from the Wudang sect without having his internal energy destroyed as a standard punishment. Silence takes over the entire temple after the totally unexpected and bizarre request made by the protagonist. The supreme leader stares at the boy with a vacant expression without being able to process that absurd demand properly. The other superior begins to sweat cold from nervousness with the boy's unbelievable audacity before the greatest authority. The boy clarifies that his only and true objective is to earn a lot of money, leaving the leader quite confused. He cracks a determined smile and confesses, without any shame, that his great interest is purely wealth. The supreme leader hits his hand on his forehead with discouragement, but admits that seeking wealth is not something inherently bad. The elder remembers that the young man already learned the secret steps of the blue cloud, which is a restricted wudang technique. He explains that no sect would let someone leave knowing secret techniques without destroying their energy or ankles. The elder taps his fingers on the table thoughtfully, admitting that he never had to deal with a case as bizarre as this. The Wudang Supreme Leader looks fixedly, the boy through his fingers with a quite intrigued expression. The elder suggests a different alternative, leaving the protagonist curious to know what his proposal will be. The master raises his index finger, indicating that he has a perfect agreement that can benefit both sides there. The leader suggests that he continue only as a secular disciple registered at the temple officially. Mok-ach-why. Young gets confused with the term and wonders what it means to be registered. Traditionally, Wudang's internal disciples register their names in a ceremony in the ancestral hall. This official registry serves to declare to the heavens the acceptance of the new sect disciple. The Supreme Leader explains that the boy will go through this registry, but will continue to be a secular disciple. This rare position is called a registered secular disciple, and has already been used in special cases in the past. In the past, the Wudang sect used this system to strengthen its defenses against the advance of the demonic cult. Mok-why. Young remembers that this happened a century ago and questions what his real advantages would be. The leader explains that he will be able to learn Wudang's martial arts if he promises to answer the sect's call. The elder faces the young man deeply while preparing to reveal a very important detail. He guarantees with serenity that there will be no type of coercion involved in that unprecedented agreement. Mok-why. Young is completely in shock upon noticing the freedom he will have with this new title. He begins to imagine the transport carriages, using the official Wudang flag to facilitate trade. The boy visualizes a huge store stamping the sect's symbol to attract customers with special prices. He thinks about the possibility of selling exclusive products, using the fame of the great warriors of the mountains. The young man realizes that he will be able to profit a lot using the sect's name, while taking advantage of the freedom of a secular one. The protagonist gets a scare upon being pulled out of his greedy daydreams by the master's serious presence. He tries to regain his composure while reflecting on the absurd potential of his future businesses. A malicious smile appears on the boy's face upon concluding that being a registered disciple is the best option. Mok-why. Young yells with excitement that he accepts the proposal and wishes to become a registered secular disciple. However, the leader raises his hand to warn that the system has not been used since the fall of the demonic cult. The elder explains that since this can create a bad precedent, he will need to take the case to the Council of Elders. He signals with his fingers that the final decision will not be taken immediately because of internal bureaucracy. The Supreme Leader grants a period of 3 months before presenting the request formally. He alerts that the elders will probably be against it for thinking the young man is receiving too many privileges. The master stares at the boy seriously, saying that he must give the elders a reason not to refuse the request. Mok-why. Young begins to sweat cold upon realizing the size of the responsibility he just received. The protagonist reflects in silence about the conditions imposed by the Supreme Leader for his stay. The young man asks with fear what would happen in case he cannot convince the Council of Elders. The leader responds coldly that in that case, he will have to choose to become a common internal disciple. The other option would be to have his Danshan destroyed forever before being expelled definitively from the sect. The sun shines over the beautiful and imposing temple structures while the boy's fate is decided. The finance master observes the scene with a satisfied smile on his face upon seeing his pupil's progress. The superior celebrates for having made the recommendation while the young man carries immense rock on his back. He praises the boy's martial talent, but the protagonist continues suffering with the absurd weight of the training. Mok-why. Young feels pressured by the master's enthusiasm and is relieved for not having told about his plans. The boy drops the giant rock, which hits the ground with a violent crash, raising a lot of dust in the courtyard. He pants from tiredness after completing the 20 exhausting repetitions, under the watchful eye of his instructor. The master praises the boy's impressive adaptability, who evolved very fast since the start of the classes. The superior decides that the physical base is already ready and leaves to fetch a wooden sword for training. The young man thinks that his physical endurance is just the result of his robust body and not of his effort. He moves the stone to the side and reflects that he needs to prove his martial worth to convince the council. To achieve the title of registered disciple, he will have to demonstrate exceptional talent with the sword. The boy believes that his commercial intelligence would already be reason enough to live in the secular world. The big problem lies precisely in proving his physical strength, since he barely started to train seriously. He remembers that wooing is still a sex of swordsmen, and ability with the blade is what matters most. The protagonist prepares to finally learn the incomparable sword techniques of the Wudang Mountain. Suddenly, he receives a blow to the head, and the master complains that he is having many distracting thoughts. The master announces that the first technique he will learn will be the 3 talents sword method. The boy finds the choice strange, for he knows that manual is sold for few coins in any common market. The master warns with a calm smile that the method taught by Wudang is completely different from the popular one. The young man remains standing in silence while the master points his finger directly to his chest in the middle of the courtyard. The superior warns with a smile that he will not explain anything and that the boy must discover the secret on his own. Birds fly through the blue and sunny sky while time passes during the rigorous martial training on the mountain. The protagonist complains about the vague explanations, but the master laments that he has difficulty in understanding things. The master asks if he knows the basic forms of the sword technique, and the young man confirms that it is general knowledge. The images show the vertical, diagonal, and horizontal cutting movements that compose the base of that fighting style. The instructor smiles, satisfied to notice that the boy already possesses a good theoretical notion about the sword movements. Suddenly, he reveals that the special training consists of practicing each of the forms 10,000 times a day. Why? Young enters despair with the absurd number, but hears that all internal disciples go through this process. The master shakes the wooden sword and says that speed doesn't matter as long as he manages to hit the daily goal. Without giving time for more complaints, the superior simply jumps far away and warns that he will return later. The young man remains there alone, holding his weapon, while getting irritated with the hasty and authoritarian way of his instructor. Scratching his head with discouragement, he resolves to change his mindset and try to face that challenge positively. He holds the sword handle firmly, thinking about making fast and sloppy movements to finish soon. The protagonist raises the wooden weapon above his head with a determined expression and starts the first movement. A system counter appears on the screen showing that he just performed the first vertical cut of 10,000. The boy grinds his teeth upon realizing that there are still almost 30,000 total movements left to complete the goal. Cry of pure frustration echoes through the valley when he realizes that it will take an eternity to finish everything. The birds watch curiously from the branch of a tree, while the noise of the training continues down there. The wooden sword falls heavily on the stone floor after the boy finally reaches his total physical limit. Why? Young falls sitting, totally exhausted and panting, without believing that he really managed to fulfill that task. He smiles at the corner of his mouth upon noticing that even to perform repetitive training, it is necessary to have some talent. The young man recalls that in the beginning his movements were sloppy and done with a totally wrong posture. With the passing of time, he felt his body become rigid, and the blows began to come out in a very strange way. The system displays the talents he possesses at the moment, revealing that his physical abilities are still at a low level. While he was resting, a new notification window appears suddenly by his side, calling his immediate attention. Completed a special mission of 1,000 movements, and earned a generous discount to buy a new talent. The boy remembers the money that he sweated to earn in the market and laments having to spend almost everything with this system. Even complaining, he holds the wooden sword again, ready to test what he just acquired with the system. After filling the goal of 1,000 repetitions, he finally manages to buy the basic talent for handling the sword. He delivers a powerful horizontal blow and feels an incredible fluidity that he had never experienced before in training. The protagonist is impressed upon noticing that the technical difference is clear even though it is a low-level talent. He looks at the weapon, wondering if he really needs to continue swinging that 10,000 times with the new gift. The master observes everything from afar with a serious and analytical look while evaluating the pupil's strange behavior. From the top of the roof, the superior guards every movement of Young, who continues practicing alone there in the courtyard. The instructor gets confused upon seeing the boy acting in a silly way and thinks he went back to being a big joker. Letting out a long sigh of tiredness, the master closes his eyes, wondering what he should do with that boy. The superior appears suddenly and orders him to stop with that immediately, leaving the boy quite startled. He walks toward the young man, complaining that that game went too far and asks if he has no focus. The master places his hand on his face, worried, warning that way he will never manage to participate in the tournament. The protagonist tilts his head, confused, and asks what exactly would be this assessment match of the sect. The instructor cracks a mysterious smile upon noticing that he managed to awaken the genuine curiosity of his disciple. He explains that it is a friendly duel between the disciples of the third generation to test the abilities of each one. The master approaches and asks provocatively if the boy's competitive spirit has already started to boil now. Young opens his eyes wide and remains in silence for a moment while he processes the information about the tournament. With a tone of mockery, the young man raises the sword and shouts that his spirit is boiling in an exaggerated and false way. He asks if the other Wudang elders will also watch the fights to see the future of the warriors. The boy cracks a malicious smile upon noticing that this will be the perfect chance to prove his worth to the old men. With a clenched fist, he states that he also wants to enter the dispute, but the master responds that that is impossible. The protagonist roars furiously, asking the reason and questions if the prohibition is for him being older than the others. The master hits Manhwa, Young's head, telling him to stop saying nonsense. He warns that to enter the tournament it is necessary to at least master the basic technique of the sword. The boy asks when the assessment match will be while still holding his wooden weapon. Young gets a scare upon hearing from the master that the tournament will happen in just 1 month. He reflects that doing 10,000 repetitions in a month is not impossible, but requires a lot of effort. The young man wonders if he will manage to show some decent martial talent just with that base. The master observes the pupil with a thoughtful look. While he notes his constant mood swing, he realizes that the boy's vertical cuts are good, but he gets distracted with ease. The instructor fears that the boy will lose himself on a strange path if left alone in training. With a quick movement, the master hits the disciple's back, who lets out a scream of pain. The superior demands that he take the training more seriously, while the boy complains about the aggression. The master decides to correct the boy's basic posture, stating that hitting the goal is not everything. He guides the boy to set his feet at shoulder width and put force in the center of the body. The instructor shows how to hold the sword handle softly before performing the movement. The master demonstrates the perfect blow, making the blade descend in a straight and precise line. Young gets hypnotized by the demonstration and begins to understand the essence of the technique. He realizes that that blow is totally different from everything he had attempted before. The master asks what he thought of the explanation, and the young man awakens from his deep thoughts. With a focused look, the boy processes the new technical details that he just witnessed. The superior questions if he still intends to continue training alone in a sloppy way. Young makes a grimace of determination while preparing to restart the exercise. A whole month passes and peace continues to reign over the sacred mountains of the Wudang sect. The young man appears sitting on the stone floor, showing a look much calmer and satisfied. The boy's face demonstrates that he is in a good mood and ready to show his results. The master arrives, asking if the warm-up finished, but the boy asks for one more hour of deadline. The instructor tells him to stop with nonsense and take the sword immediately to start the assessment. Manhwa. Young observes the master and admits to himself that that man is really incredible. He is grateful for having received exclusive instructions for 5 days in a row in the courtyard. The boy wonders if the master is just trying not to waste the lessons he taught. The superior stares at him seriously and questions the reason he still hasn't started the cuts. Young breathes deeply and warns that he will do the movements even without needing so much rush. He recognizes that he finally entered the sword's path, thanks to Cheonhwa's teachings. The young man tightens the wooden weapon's handle with a force that demonstrates his technical evolution. The master observes attentively every detail of the disciple's posture that seems much more solid. Manhwa. Young raises the sword with determination and promises to show the fruits of all his effort. A powerful impact shakes the air at the moment the young man releases his energy in the first blow. The boy's eyes shine with absolute concentration while he executes the technique. Fast and precise movements cut the wind, creating traces of blue energy all over the courtyard. The protagonist focuses totally on the blade, while his body moves with a scary fluidity. Powerful transverse cuts cross in the air, forming a giant X of pure martial pressure. After the intense demonstration, Manhwa. Young pants heavily while he recovers his breath. He puts the wooden sword away with a dry movement, feeling the weight of the duty fulfilled. A smile of satisfaction appears on the boy's face upon noticing that his technique evolved drastically. The master remains with a neutral and silent expression, just observing his exhausted pupil. The superior asks what the boy is looking at, and the tension climate ends up breaking right away. Young gets disappointed with the lack of compliments and asks if the master has nothing to say. He questions if his form is at least acceptable, while the master just smiles slightly. The instructor laughs, saying it was just a joke and admits that his look now is decent. He praises the disciple's change who managed to train without distractions, even when he was alone. The boy concludes that in a way he ended up reaching something very close to an enlightenment. Young asks if his current abilities are already enough for him to be able to enter the assessment match. Master Cheonhwa gets a bit thoughtful and resolves to propose a final test to put the young man's potential to the test. He orders that the boy try to block 10 of his attacks, using only that wooden training sword. The experienced warrior bends down and picks up a simple dry tree branch thrown on the floor to use as a weapon. With a very friendly smile on his face, he warns nonchalantly that he will use only that twig in the duel. The two position themselves at a safe distance on the stone courtyard while preparing to start the strength test. The master asks nonchalantly if the young man is already totally prepared to start the dispute. The protagonist's look becomes extremely focused, demonstrating that he does not intend to make things easy for the tutor. Young shouts, accepting the challenge, and charges with speed toward the master, delivering a direct blow. The tutor blocks the punch easily and praises the quick attempt to force a direct combat right there in the arena. However, the master soon warns with a smile that that tactic only works when both fighters possess equal strength. With an extremely simple and fast movement, the master manages to repel the boy's attack with ease. The impact pushes the boy backward, and the master jumps majestically to deliver his next blow. The young man grinds his teeth in pure frustration upon realizing that he will have serious problems keeping up with the duel's pace. They exchange one more violent blow, and the wooden sword collides again against the tutor's simple twig. With a quite confident look, the elite master announces that that was already the second blow blocked by the young man. The boy sweats cold from nervousness upon noticing that the master is not kidding, even using just a twig in the fight. Young begins to analyze the movements and deduces what Cheonhwa's real intention is behind each attack. He realizes that the master is using the 3 classic cuts of the sword technique to test his reflexes. The boy concludes that the master wants to know if he really managed to master all the basic forms of combat. Wei-young raises the sword to block the last attack, thinking that he will pass the test if he manages to hold that blow. However, the master sketches a very mischievous smile on the corner of his mouth, leaving the boy in complete despair. In an unbelievable speed, the master performs a quick feat and passes straight through the protagonist's defense. The master lands elegantly, holding his little wooden twig right after concluding his movement. He advises the boy calmly to never lower his guard or freeze at the final moment of a real combat. Wei-young complains indignantly, accusing the tutor of cheating in the fight by changing his posture in the last second of the test. A strong rumble of wind and mystic energy raises a lot of dust around both fighters in the courtyard. The little tree branch used by the master ends up breaking in half due to the force of the last impact. The master looks surprised at his broken twig and lets out an admiring murmur with the boy's resistance. He praises the protagonist's quick reaction, who managed somehow to defend himself from that surprise attack. Still trembling from the physical effort, the young man asks confidently what the master thought of his defense. He begins to celebrate, saying that he passed the test, but suddenly feels the late impact of the blow on his body. The tutor questions ironically if the boy would say that he blocked the attack, if they were using iron swords. The young man laments internally, thinking that the result would be very different if he had more time to train. The blue-robed master just closes his eyes, sketching a friendly and calm smile before the boy's discouragement. He warns that even if he passed, the boy could not participate in the official assessment tournament of the great sect. The master throws the piece of broken twig on the stone floor, while preparing to explain the reason for his speech. With a calm and relaxed look, he focuses his attention on the young man who continues sitting on the courtyard floor of training. He reveals directly that only the temple's official disciples possess permission to compete. Wei-young is left completely without reaction, staring at the tutor with a look of pure incredulity after hearing that. The images show the beautiful and imposing facade of the great pavilion, where the disciples train arduously. The boy appears sitting on the wooden bench with crossed arms and an expression of extreme dissatisfaction. The master asks if he is still sulking, and the young man replies that he exerted himself for nothing because of his tutor. The tutor clarifies that he could not fight only while he remained with the post of common secular disciple. The master complains about the boy's irritated looks, and the boy thinks angrily that he would like the tutor not to be able to speak. Still bothered, the young man asks the real reason for being brought to the official fight pavilion of the sect. The master warns that the boy is too confident and that he is underestimating the third-generation warriors. Wei-young crosses his arms, contesting the tutor's speech, and questions if he would really lose to those children. The blue-robed master stares at him with a quite focused and serious look that makes the young man pay more attention to the arena. He orders calmly that the boy observe attentively the training dispute that is happening right below. Qianwei explains that that young fighter is the most awaited disciple of the entire third generation. He is described as someone honest and simple, but who does not possess any blind spot in his fighting style. His opponent begins to sweat from nervousness upon noticing that he is completely without exit before that attack. With a quick and precise blow, the boy is thrown far away without managing to sketch any reaction of defense. The opponent falls heavily to the ground on his back, while the winner simply begins to walk away from the arena. The young warrior holds his wooden sword in a firm way, demonstrating total control and tranquility. The master reveals that the boy is named Wei-young, and is considered the greatest talent trained by the sect leader. The tournament board displays clearly the name Wei-young, as the great winner of that competition. The two continue walking through the temple hallway right after observing the announcement of the prodigy's victory. The companion asks how he feels after seeing with his own eyes the opponent's skill level. Wei-young admits in his thoughts that the opponent really possesses an incredible fighting ability. He realizes that he would need many years of intense training to manage to reach that technical level. Before so much difference, the protagonist begins to reflect in silence and gets quite intrigued by everything. He wonders why the elders insisted so much on keeping him in the sect, having such a great talent nearby. The other man just observes him from the silence, maintaining a mysterious and quite reserved expression. He warns that to gain the elders' recognition, the boy will have to defeat someone strong like Myung Il. Wyung knows that he has no choice and needs to win to manage to prove his martial worth in the remaining time. The young man is surprised and asks how the companion knew about the need for the elders' recognition. The man in blue turns slowly and faces the protagonist with a look very calm and quite confident. He cracks a smile at the corner of his mouth and asks if the boy really thought that he would not know anything. The man reveals that he heard from the sect leader about the boy's attempt to become a registered disciple. He places his hand on his forehead and says he intends to help in the negotiations, for having a talent in wudang is advantageous. He stares at the protagonist with a very serious look and asks if the young man understands the reality of the situation. The man states directly and without beating around the bush that the boy's current level is insufficient to defeat Myung Il. He explains that although the boy possesses good martial talent, his age is already advanced for training. He concludes by saying that the elders will not make any exception if the young man does not manage to surpass that prodigy. The man asks what the boy will do if he loses and is forced to become an official temple disciple. The boy places his clenched fist against his chest, demonstrating that he already took a very serious and drastic decision. He responds with firmness that he prefers to destroy his own danchin and leave than be forced to stay there. The companion opens his mouth, surprised with the unbelievable determination and the bold response of the young warrior. He closes his mouth right after and remains in silence for a moment, digesting that declaration so extreme. Letting out a long sigh of tiredness, the man relaxes his shoulders and decides to change the course of that serious conversation. The master says that his determination is such that everyone would think that being a merchant is his true gift. Wying explains that he also has no intention of letting them destroy his danchin so easily. He states with pride that for a merchant, money is vital like rice, water, and salt each day. The boy extends his open hand and says with a nonchalant tone that it is nothing very complex what he desires. The boy smiles and asks back for the copper coins that the man in blue was keeping in a safe way. The young man says that money represents life itself, and the companion asks where he wants to get with this. He makes a simple gesture with his open hand and guarantees that his intention is not anything complicated to understand. He insists very happily that he would like to receive back the 100 coins he had deposited before. Alone on a wooden bench, the boy observes attentively a mystic scroll that shines before him. He analyzes his finances and realizes that at the moment he possesses only 6 taels of silver saved in his name. The young man remembers that he spent almost all the money received from the leader, remaining only a small part with him. He knows he needs to use every remaining coin to create a secret strategy capable of defeating Myung Il. The boy realizes that putting this plan into practice is showing itself something much more difficult than he thought. He reflects that any decent martial technique costs a fortune while the man in blue approaches. The protagonist wonders in silence if there exists any other way to manage to get more coins quickly. Suddenly he gets a big scare upon seeing a heavy bag full of money being thrown directly into his lap. Upon being questioned about the package, the man reveals that it is the 100 coins the young man had requested previously. He says that the rest is the accumulated yield, but the boy finds it strange that copper coins yield interest like that. The young man asks, curious, the reason for receiving that amount, and the master says he already explained the motive. The man in blue looks at the sky thoughtfully while preparing to speak something deeper about the situation. He states that the boy is different from the prodigy and knows that he prefers to destroy the danchin than continue in the sect. The protagonist listens in silence, while noticing the sincere concern of the master regarding his future. The man explains from behind that the money serves as compensation for the great risk of having the Danshan destroyed. Young opens the bag of shiny coins and discovers that the total value reaches 100 taels of purest silver. The master suggests that the boy use the amount as initial capital for his future businesses outside of there. The boy holds one of the silver ingots and questions where so much wealth kept by a Taoist came from. The finance master cracks a calm smile and admits without any shame that that is all he possesses. He tells that he accumulated that fortune by receiving gifts from people he helped in his travels around the world. The superior confesses that keeping that secret hideout was becoming a big nuisance with the passing of time. With eyes shining, the boy pulls the cords of the bag with a lot of force to close his new fortune. Young warns in a playful way that he will never return any amount that has already fallen into his hands. The master smiles, satisfied to see the boy's reaction, and asks how he is feeling at that moment. The man asks if his energy returned now that the pocket is full, and the boy confirms without hesitating. The protagonist shows a smile of pure confidence and states that he feels completely invincible now. A few days pass and the characteristic sound of heavy training begins to echo through the courtyards of the great sect. A wooden sword hits the target with an extremely dry and powerful impact, raising dust in the location. The feet of a warrior move with extreme agility through the stone floor, demonstrating excellent posture. The wooden training dummy receives an impeccable sequences of fast blows that make the structure tremble. Myong-il executes his movements perfectly, showing all his dedication to daily training. Suddenly, slow claps interrupt the silence of the courtyard, calling the immediate attention of whoever was there. The prodigy interrupts his movement with the sword in the air upon noticing the unexpected presence of a visitor. He lowers his guard slowly and turns to face the young intruder with a quite serious expression. Young appears clapping the training, under the look of other disciples who were practicing around. He praises the prodigy's technique, saying that seeing the movements up close is much more impressive for real. The young prodigy stares at him with strangeness upon noticing, by the simple clothes, that it is a secular disciple. The protagonist explains his temporary situation in the sect and says he received orders to train with him. Without giving the slightest attention to the boy's words, the prodigy turns his back and tells him to leave there. Young maintains a calm smile on his face, without shaking not even a little with the cold attitude of the young opponent. He shouts from afar, warning that he will consider the boy's refusal as a victory by direct default. The protagonist laughs aloud, saying he needs the elder's approval and that the rival should not get upset. The prodigy tightens his sword handle with so much force that the veins of his hand get to jump from anger. Young approaches from behind with a quite provocative expression to increase the boy's irritation. The boy turns to an instructor who was nearby and asks if he would accept to be the duel's referee. The prodigy closes his eyes for a second while trying to control the anger he feels before the provocation. The instructor in blue accepts the request promptly, while the young rival lets out a very sarcastic laugh. He lets out a heavy sigh while the protagonist just observes with a quite fun smile. With an extremely furious look, the boy promises to make the opponent regret bitterly for that. Young opens a sarcastic smile from ear to ear and responds with disdain for the rival to give his best. Both fighters assume their positions in the large circular arena, under the watchful eye of the entire audience. The central referee looks at both competitors and asks aloud if both are already ready to fight. Young confirms that he is with a nod of the head, maintaining a totally relaxed and confident posture. The young prodigy enters his classic combat position, holding firm the weapon with both hands. The instructor closes his eyes for a brief moment before giving the start signal for both opponents. With a short command, he authorizes the start of the combat, and a strong wave of wind spreads throughout the arena. Myong-il charges for the attack in high speed, and both wooden swords collide with extreme violence. The mystic impact of the blow creates a rumble in the air, while both opponents measure their strengths in the arena. The prodigy retreats with agility, lowering himself to maintain the perfect balance after the first confrontation. He firms his foot on the stone floor, demonstrating a firm base and an impressive reaction speed. The opponent stabilizes quickly and adjusts the grip on the wooden sword, demonstrating a lot of firmness. He advances, delivering an extremely fast vertical cut that forces the protagonist to defend himself in a hurry. Wei-young blocks the attack and realizes in his thoughts that the boy's style is simple but devastating. He notes that his small advantage of speed disappeared, and that he will lose badly if the fight continues at that rhythm. However, a malicious smile appears on the face of the protagonist, who clearly does not intend to leave things like that. He fakes being desperate and at his physical limit, so that the opponent does not suspect his farce. The boy plans to activate an unexpected resource and exhibit a triumphant surprise in the middle of the combat in the arena. He decides to acquire a totally new talent from the system to catch the prodigy completely off guard. Wei-young selects a special skill of fast movement, knowing he will have only one chance to win. The mystic money bag kept in his belt shines intensely, indicating that the payment was made. Both fighters charge at the same time for the decisive confrontation, determined to give everything they have in the arena. The protagonist focuses his look on the opponent with an extremely confident and quite mischievous expression. The young prodigy notices the sudden change of the rival's posture and opens his eyes wide, quite surprised. A shiny message from the system warns that an additional slot to equip talents was unlocked. The boy is left totally in shock with the unexpected notification and lets out a confused murmur in the middle of the action.